What's up everyone? It's been a little while since I've made a GH5 settings video similar to this, so I thought I'd make a new addition. And really this video is all about getting the most cinematic experience while shooting video with the Panasonic GH5. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you've heard me say so many times that the GH5 really is like a cinema style camera without actually being a cinema style camera. So even though it's 2021, maybe you just got a Panasonic GH5 or maybe you've had one for a little while and you want to go just a little bit further in how to set it up and get the most cinematic experience while shooting video. But these are just some settings that help me get the best video experience out of the GH5. So one of the first things that I'm gonna do is actually set the shutter angle. Now, a lot of times you're shooting with a shutter speed on other cameras, but the GH5 actually has in a shutter angle that you can set. Now, you know that with the shutter angle, with the shutter speed, it needs to be double the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be around 50. But on the GH5 and the shutter angle, any frame rate that you shoot at, it's going to automatically double it so that you don't have to worry about making sure you make those changes. Like let's say you jump to 60 frames per second, you don't have to worry about the shutter angle or the shutter speed because it's already going to be set. All right, so to set the shutter angle, we're actually going to go into the first menu item and we're just going to scroll down to where it says SS gain operation. And we're going to click on that, and normally it'd probably be right up here with the speed, the seconds, but we're actually going to switch it to the angle right there. And then you'll have 180 down here where your shutter speed would normally be. So with this angle set, any frame rate that you shoot at, the shutter speed is going to automatically double. So you don't even have to worry about making sure you have your shutter speed set right. All right, the second thing that we're going to go in and do is we're actually going to go to the system frequency, and we're going to take a look at the system frequency, which is under the second wrench on the third page, depending on what edition of software you have on your GH5. Sometimes some of these menu items get added, or I don't know, maybe taken away. I'm not totally sure. But right now I have mine set at the NTSC, and like a lot of times the system frequency is going to depend on the area of the world you're at. So if you're in Europe or Africa and you're watching this, parts of Asia, you might be shooting at the 50 Hertz, the PAL version. I'm in North America. South America, a lot of times it's the NTSC, and that Hertz rate is going to be that 5994. Now, the GH5 does have another option, which is the cinema option, which is going to give you a straight 24 frames per second. But let's switch that, and we have to actually turn it off and then turn it back on to make sure that system frequency is set. And actually it's going to give us a straight 24 frames per second, not a 23.98. But what this is going to do is we're actually, if you're maybe like a 30 frames per second shooter, you're actually going to lose those 30 frames per second options. So if we go to record quality, everything's going to be in the 24 frames per second. You still have some of these great options like the Cinema 4K, the 4K All-I, 400 megabytes per second, but you do lose those 30 frames per second options if you are a 30 frames per second shooter. Now, a majority of the time I am shooting in 23.98. I'll jump to this 24 every once in a while, and I've been using that 23.98 frame rate a lot more because there have been times where I've had to jump into that 30 frames per second, and that way I just have it set and I can use that 23.98 or the 29.98, whatever that is, for those different shoots. So I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to change that system frequency back to the NTSC. All right, now that you have that set, one of the things that you're going to want to pay attention to are the record quality settings. Now, I did a whole video on these record quality settings that you can check up right up at the top, but let's just quickly go through some of these options that you're going to have. So in the menu, you go to like the second menu option, and then you have record quality, and this is where you're going to find all of those different record quality options that you may want to explore and try. Now, some of these you're gonna have to have a very powerful computer to process, like the Cinema 4K All-I, 400 megabytes per second. That's gonna be a beefy file that not a lot of computers can handle. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you have a very powerful computer to kind of process those. So one of the things that you're gonna notice is the difference between the 10-bit color and the 8-bit color. So 10-bit color is just gonna be a little bit deeper of a color, and it's gonna reduce some of the banding that you see in the image sometimes with 8-bit color, especially in sky scenes or sometimes even in skin. So you're gonna have 10-bit and 8-bit color. Another thing that you're gonna see is the 4K 60 option, 8-bit. So that's actually gonna be a 60 frames per second file. Then another option you're gonna see down here is the 4K 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second. And what this is gonna do is actually provide the variable frame rate. So if you shoot this or full HD, 1920 by 1080 at 8-bit, you'll be able to go up to 180 frames per second on the variable frame rate. The 4K option allows you to go up to 60 frames per second on the variable frame rate. So let's just set that. Now we have that set at the 4K 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second, 420 8-bit, and then we're gonna go into set the variable frame rate, and that's gonna process a slow motion file in camera so that you already have it ready to go. You don't need to go and modify any of the frame rates in your editor. So to get to the variable frame rate, we're just gonna go to the first menu option, and we're just gonna turn this on, or let's go ahead and set it, and then we can go here and just set it to 60 frames per second. And it's the record frame rate is gonna be that 23.98 like we set, you know, with the system frequency and the frame rate that we're shooting in. But here we're gonna have a processed slow motion file. All right, so we have frame rates taken care of. And now what we're gonna do is actually we're gonna go and we're gonna adjust the ISO settings. In here, we're gonna go to this wrench right here, and we're gonna go to the exposure and the ISO increments. We're actually gonna switch that to a third, which I already have right here, but we're gonna switch it. It'll probably come as 1, but we're gonna switch it to a third EV, and that's gonna be like third increments. So you're just gonna be able to kind of dial in those ISO settings, kind of fine tune them a little bit so it's not such big jumps in between the ISO levels. You'll be able to kind of adjust those in increments. So if we go to the ISO, you can see that right now it moves in thirds rather than like 100 to 200. You have 125, 160, and then 200. So then 250, 320, and then 400. So you're just gonna be able to kind of dial in those ISO settings and really help adjust that exposure that you're gonna need. So let's go in and take a look at some of the color profiles that we're able to shoot with on the GH5. And with the color profiles, you're actually gonna find those under the second menu item, and then it's on the first page and it's gonna say photo style, just hit that. Now, a lot of times, like for my YouTube videos, also for some client work, I'm actually shooting in the natural color profile because I like the colors that I'm getting out of it, and it actually saves some time when it comes to editing. So here's the settings that I use for the natural color profile: -2, -5, 0, -1. And then for interviews, I use -1 on the hue. For B-roll, I might take that back to 0. Lately, I've just kind of been keeping it at -1. Just because I don't have to go back and change it all the time. But that's what I would be using with the natural color profile, and I really like the colors that come out. And if you wanna check out my natural color profile confession video, I'll have that linked right up here. But another good option for shooting some great video on the GH5 would be the built-in Cine-D option that comes on the camera when you purchase it. And for the Cine-D, when I shoot Cine-D, which is not actually very often, but here's some of the settings that I'm using for the Cine-D: -1, -5, 0, -1, 0. You can purchase a light version of the Vlog called Vlog L. That is, it comes in a box and that you have to upload to the GH5. It's whatever. For Vlog L, I don't change any of the settings. If you want to learn more about some of the color profiles more in depth, I do have a video that you can check out right up here. Now, one of the things you might want to explore if you're shooting Vlog is that the GH5 actually does have a Vlog assist option. So let's set this to Vlog, and then we're going to go into this first menu item, and it's going to be on the second page, and it's actually going to be Vlog L View Assist. And what that's gonna do is you're able to either upload your own LUT to the GH5, or it has the LUT select and you can select like a Rec 709. So that's just gonna help a little bit, you know, seeing the image in Vlog, because Vlog is so flat. Sometimes it's hard to see like where focus is or what's really exposed, what's not exposed. So one of the great cinematic features of the GH5 are all of the exposure tools that you have built into the camera that you don't have to have another monitor. If you want to see a more detailed video about some of those exposure tools, you can check out that video right up top that's popping up. But real quick, let's just go through some of the exposure tools that I use that I find very helpful when shooting video. And the first is going to be the histogram right here. So these little lines, you can kind of tell the overall exposure in the image. So to get the histogram up on the screen, let's go to the menu and we're going to go to this first wrench, and we're actually going to go to monitor and display, because that's going to put some of those features up on this monitor for us to see. So the histogram is right there. You can turn it on or turn it off. And if you turn it on, you can kind of place it anywhere on the screen. So I kind of like it kind of right over there, right above the audio bars. And so we're gonna have that set. So another option that we're gonna want on this screen is gonna be the zebra pattern. Make sure you check out my color profile video, because that's gonna tell you some of the levels that I keep these zebra stripes at on the different color profiles. But with the natural, I'll just tell you right now, with the natural, I actually have zebra 2 set at 95, zebra 1 at 70. So that's just gonna show where these parts of the image are gonna start blowing out, being overexposed. You're gonna get stripes on it, and it will be very easy to see how to expose your image with those zebra patterns. And then one of the other things that you're gonna wanna take full advantage of is the built-in waveform and vector scope on the GH5. And to get that, we're actually gonna go back into the menu to the first option, and right down at the bottom of the first page is the waveform and vector scope. And so what we can do is pick one of those to have on the screen, and that's gonna help you really dial in your exposure without having a separate monitor. And that's what's so great about the GH5 are these built-in exposure tools. So let me tell you this real quick. One of the things, like, you're not gonna want that up on the screen all the time. So one of the things that I did is actually set one of my function buttons. You can customize all these buttons on here, and I set this function 4 button as my vector scope waveform button. So I just press that and I can automatically have it right on there, and then it'll pop up at any time that I need it. Now, if you're shooting Vlog, you're gonna wanna take full advantage of that waveform to make sure you have your levels correct. One of the other features I find super helpful is actually the focus peaking. So what we're gonna do is go back in here, and we're actually going to go back up to the 5th page of the first wrench, and we're going to go to peaking. And so what this is gonna do is actually add some color around what you have in focus. So it's gonna be way easier to tell what's in focus on your image. And so you can kind of set it, you can set like the different color if you want it high or low. I like it on high because I like seeing what is in focus, and I wanna make sure I have the focus dialed in. Hopefully focus is dialed in here. So one of the things that we all know is that the autofocus on the GH5 is absolutely horrible. So if you're pulling focus with this, especially if you're not using a native lens, you might wanna consider using the manual focus assist on the GH5. And to get there, we're just gonna go to this focus option under the first wrench. And on the first page, second page, third page of that focus option is we're gonna go to manual focus assist. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna punch in the image. When you turn that focus ring, it's gonna punch in the image so that you can really see what's in focus. So you can just kind of drag or use the joystick to kind of move the little box around, and then you can really see and make sure everything is in focus that you want in focus. So it just kind of punches the screen in a little bit and helps with that manual focus, because we're not using autofocus, so we need to make sure that things are in focus when we shoot. So this was just a quick overview of some of the settings I'm using right now to get the most cinematic experience shooting video on the GH5. If you have anything that you would add, make sure you comment those things below. I'd love to get a conversation started about some of the settings that you're using on the GH5 to get the best video experience. Let's get into the GH5. I like that take.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Okay.
Feel the space, feel the rhythm, feel the ride. 1, 2, 3, it's about that time. Okay. All right, guys. So one of my favorite features on the GH5 has to do with the IBIS. Now, what does IBIS stand for? It actually stands for in-body image stabilization. Now, the Panasonic GH5 has one of the best in-body image stabilizations on the market today. Now, in-body image stabilization is good if you know how to use it. You can get some super smooth motions by using it if you know how to use it properly.
One of the greatest features about the GH5 is just the functionality and customization that you have with this camera. This thing is loaded with function buttons that you can set up custom menus. And all you need to do is just find one of these function buttons like function 2, hold it down, and you can set the custom menu right from there. And not only that, you also have the custom settings up on the knob up top. So you can set custom 1, set that to 120 frames per second. You got custom 2, set that to 60 frames per second, and then right from there you just turn the knob and you have them ready to roll, like while you're shooting. So the functionality and customization of this camera is through the roof and probably one of the best on the market.
Hold it. All right, here we go. Now next has to be the lens options. Now, people stray away from this because it's a micro four thirds camera, but the lens options that are out there for it are absolutely phenomenal. You have the native Panasonic lenses, you have Olympus lenses, and then with the speed booster, you have full frame glass. So that's Canon, Sigma, on top of that, there's speed boosters out there for it, for Viltrox, Metabones. I personally prefer the Metabone speed booster. I love the 18-35 1.8. It's a beast of a lens. That's Sigma. You gotta check that out.
I have this like weird way of talking when I'm on camera that's not natural. Another feature I love about the Panasonic GH5 is the mobile app that you have with it. It's not necessarily part of the camera, but it controls every aspect of the camera. So you can hit record, like if I'm standing back here, I can hit record, I'm ready to roll. But I've got a bunch of other features and menu items on the app that makes it super easy to film yourself for things like this, like YouTube. So in a future video, I'm gonna be taking a look at the app and how it controls the camera.
All right, cool. One of the last things that I love is the resolution of this camera, what it has to offer. We're talking 4K 10-bit 422. What? That means that you have a full range of colors that this camera can take in. That means that you have a full range of colors that this camera can take in. It's absolutely phenomenal. Now, most people don't know that this camera actually shoots in 6K, but it's anamorphic. Now, check this out. There's a lot more budget-friendly anamorphic either options or lenses that are coming out soon that I'm excited to try out on this camera. Like, come on, 6K? Oh. And then let's talk about like 1080, 180. I mean, that's super slow motion. I personally just use 120, but compared to some other cameras out there, this camera actually shoots better quality slow motion than some of these other cameras. And so that's what I love about this camera, is just the resolution and the options for choosing that. Back to you, Caleb.
Okay, focus lock. Another feature that I love about the GH5 is the focus lock and manual focus. Now, the autofocus on the GH5 is not fantastic, but the focus lock on manual mode is outstanding. So what you can do is set up the focus box in the middle of the frame, use your app to hit focus lock, it locks onto you, and you're ready to roll. You're ready to shoot. So another way you can do it is you have the focus lock button on the back of the camera, or you use the touch screen, which is awesome on the GH5 as well, to focus lock.
Now you're thinking, oh man, I gotta check my wallet because, you know, like a camera like this sounds super expensive. Well, it used to be when I bought it, but today it's actually gone down, which is the price is $1,297.99. And so what that means is that the camera just for the body is actually not that expensive. And the lens options, especially if you're just first starting out, are actually not that expensive either. You can get a pretty good kit probably under $2,000. And so that's what I love about this camera. I mean, I use it for professional shoots and sometimes vlogging as well, but mainly for professional shoots. And my clients love the look that this camera produces because it is super clean. And so guys, thanks so much for checking this out. And I don't know.
Today I'm going to show you how I customize the Panasonic GH5 to fit my needs, and I'll show you how you can customize your GH5 by using the function buttons and custom menu up on the turn knob. It's going to be a good time. Hey everyone, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is a resource to help you make your own videos. It would be so awesome if you hit that subscribe button. The Panasonic GH5 is one of the most customizable cameras on the market, so let's dive into it. I'll show you my custom settings and I'll show you how to easily customize the Panasonic GH5. All right, to start off, I'm just gonna run through some of the shortcuts that I have set up and how I have it customized. And I use those by, you know, just using the function buttons or the custom options on the knob. And it's really easy to do, and I'll show you how to do it in just a sec, but I'll just run through some of the settings that I have and some of the customization that I have set up. And really, you can customize this camera really in any way that you want to. It's awesome. So first of all, I'm just gonna go through the different function buttons and I'll show you what I have set up. So the first one I'm gonna go to is just right down here at the bottom under the scroll wheel. And that's function 4. And what I have set up, once I click that, I just have my different scopes set up there. So I can pop those on and off really easily and get a quick look without having to be on my screen the whole time. So function 4 I just have set up as my different scopes. Up here right above the scroll wheel is function 3, and what I have that set up are the different record quality formats. So a lot of times I shoot in the 4K 8-bit, you know, 24 frames per second. And then, or I mean, you can scroll through any of these and pick if you want to shoot in Cinema 4K or all I, whatever you want to do. Usually I just keep it right there on 4K 8-bit because up here, function 1, I have set as my variable frame rate. So when you shoot in 4K 8-bit, you can choose different variable frame rates. And so you can go up here and you can shoot 4K 60 right there. Super easy to get to. And then I'm ready to roll by just hitting a couple buttons rather than having to go into the menu, shuffle through all that, you know, so on and so forth. You understand. So function 2, I just kind of left as it was to get to the different color profiles. And if I want to change the different type of format that I'm shooting in, I can easily go and do that and just scroll through all this stuff if I need to, you know, make any of those quick adjustments, which I think that one was already set as that. Then up top on the knob, when I switch it to C1, it's automatically going to go to 1080 with a variable frame rate of 120. So if I want to go to that real quick, I just turn that knob and boom, it goes right to 120. And then the custom 2 right up top, I have set as 4K 60 once again, in case I want to make that quick move, and it's super easy to get to right on this knob right up here. So that's how I have mine customized, and I'm not even using all of my buttons that I could use. So one of the things I wanted to leave one open so I can show you how to make those adjustments yourself if you want to customize your own GH5. So rather than doing one of these things that I already have set, I'm going to go up here to function 5. And if you want to make that a custom button, really all you need to do, and it's super simple, just take it and just hold the button down. And then you have all of these options that you can choose from to set that button at whatever you want. Self timer, anything here. If you want 4K live cropping, which is an amazing feature on the GH5, it's right there and it's accessible. You can even do different mic level adjustments if you don't want to touch the LED screen. Peaking, if you want to go back and forth from, I know down here, if you want to go back and forth from, you know, different color profiles, you can set that as one of those color profiles that you can easily get to and go back and forth on those. You can really set any of these options by just holding down a function button and going to it. Now I just want to show you how to set one of the custom options up here on the knob. And to do that, it's super easy. All you need to do is just have everything set the way you want it right here on your screen. So if you want 4K 10-bit at 24 frames per second, and you have your lens settings, you know, at wide open at 1.3, ISO at 100, just go into the menu here and then go to some of the custom options, and then you're gonna go on the first page of this little wrench. You're just gonna go to set, custom set. And here it's going to have all of the different options for you that you can take whatever profile you have up on your screen, just take that and you can set it by one of these. So every time you turn the knob to one of these custom settings, it's gonna be whatever is on your screen at the moment. So I'm just gonna set this one as custom 3, the first one. So it's gonna ask you if you wanna override all these settings, and you're gonna hit yes, it's completed. Now, when you go back out here, when you go to the custom 3, boom, you're gonna have your settings right there. Everything that you set up just a little bit ago is gonna be right there. And it's easy to adjust, easy to get to. If you're on the fly running gun type shooting, you're gonna be able to make adjustments super quick and super easy. So you have all those function options, and one button that I didn't show you is this button right here on the front. You can customize this button as well to whatever you want, variable frame rate, Wi-Fi for the camera, whatever it is that you want. All right, so like I said, the GH5 video record quality settings are sometimes they're kind of unmatched on some of these other cameras. Some of these newer cameras that came out in 2020, they're getting a lot closer, but the GH5 was really ahead of its time and offering some of these record quality settings. And in this video, I'm not gonna get into like a ton of detail, like between, you know, progressive and interlaced and some of the details on some of those settings, but this is more of just kind of an overview. If you just got a GH5, this might come in handy whether you're shooting client work. You might want a different setting than if you're shooting YouTube content or Instagram content, that type of thing. So we're just gonna jump into the menu and we'll just take a look at what we have for the GH5 video record quality settings. All right, so one of the very first things I like to take a look at is the system frequency and setting up the system frequency. And under that, you can find it under the second wrench in the menu, and you just kind of scroll down until you find system frequency. And right now I have it set up in the NTSC 59.94 Hertz. If you are in Europe or basically anywhere else other than the United States, you might be shooting in the 50 Hertz, the PAL. But another really good system frequency is the cinema mode at 24 Hertz, and that's gonna give you a straight 24 frames per second file. The NTSC 59.94 Hertz, that's gonna give you a 23.98 file. Now I would say a lot of the time I use NTSC, but I have shot a lot in cinema mode at 24, and you know, it's a fantastic frequency and I'd highly recommend it. All right, so next let's go into the record formats. So we're gonna go up here and we're gonna find the record format, and that is going to be under the second menu item, and it's gonna be on the first page, the very first thing that you're gonna have there. Now, some of these different video record formats, I don't even touch really, actually. The ABC HD, I don't even touch that. And that's best for, you know, playback on like a high definition TV, that type of thing. And then you have the MP4. Now the MP4 is is really good quality. And I've used MP4 and I would recommend using MP4. And then you have MP4 HEVC. And the HEVC stands for like a high efficiency video coding. So my understanding is it's known as like the H.265 format. If you're familiar with H.264, H.265, those types of standards. Totally correct me down in the comments. I really don't use it that often, so I don't know a ton about it. All right, so the other option you're gonna have is the MP4 LPCM. And the LPCM stands for something kind of confusing. All you really need to know is that it's gonna probably give you the best type of audio. So if you really need to focus on audio, you might wanna use this file format. Now, another great thing about this MP4 format is that it's gonna be great for editing, as is the MOV. Now, lately, I have been keeping my GH5 on this MOV format. All right, now let's get into a little bit more of the fun part of this video. If this video is fun at all, I don't even know. Now we're gonna go back to the main menu item, and we're actually gonna start looking at some of these record qualities that we have. Now this is where we're gonna find some of that juiciness. Now I'm gonna start all the way at the top of this page with the record quality, which we found on that first menu page. And I'm not gonna go through every single one of these, but we'll take a look at some of the main ones, and then I'll get into the ones that I use. Okay, so the very first one that we're gonna take a look at is the Cinema 4K All-I 400 megabytes per second at 24p. So I'm not gonna be able to shuffle through some of the things on the left side of that menu, but just kind of go through that left side with me. So the very first thing that you're gonna see is 4096 by 2160 at 23.98p. So that's gonna be the resolution and frame rate that you're shooting at. And I actually love shooting in Cinema 4K, not necessarily this option of Cinema 4K, but I do love shooting in Cinema 4K, and the format that you get is awesome. And then the next line you see, the image sensor output is actually at that 23.98, the same as the frame rate. And that's where we want it. That's gonna be totally fine. And then the next line is the 422 10-bit All-I. So let's first go with the 422. So that 422 color sampling is gonna allow a lot of detail in those colors. So the 422 refers to the color sampling rate. So this is kind of how I've seen it described, is that, let's say you have a group of 4 pixels on the sensor, and 2 of those pixels are gonna copy the color of the other 2. Now, if you compare that with 420 color, only 1 pixel in that group of 4 is going to record that color sample. So 420 is still really good quality, but it's not as rich and in-depth as the 422. So the next number that we see there is the 10-bit. And so that is the bit depth of the image that you're getting. So the bit depth is like the red, green, and blue pixels that the image can record, and it's like kind of like the brightness levels. So the brightness levels of 10-bit is more like, I think it's like 1024, and then the levels of 8-bit is 256. So you can really see the difference in the level of brightness between 8-bit and 10-bit. And that's why having 10-bit built into the GH5 is such a big deal. All right, so the next thing that we see here is All-I. And what All-I is like all intra. And so it's gonna be like a very powerful compression, which we see by that next line of 400 megabytes per second. So an All-I is gonna be a super huge file, and you better have a very powerful computer to be able to edit this footage straight out of camera. So another thing is you're gonna wanna make sure you have a memory card that can actually record 400 megabytes per second. So the next thing that you see is the LPCM. So you're gonna be able to record audio with it, and you shouldn't have any issues. So the next thing that we see is the HLG available. And what that means is that it's gonna allow you to shoot in the HLG high dynamic range color profile. Now I don't really use that, so I'm gonna skip to the next thing. Let's go through some of these other record quality formats and settings, and I'll show you where some of the differences are. The Cinema 4K that I use a lot is gonna be this Cinema 4K 10-bit 150 megabytes per second at 24p. So the thing that changed is the compression of All-I to long GOP. And so what long GOP is just a different type of compression that is gonna kind of save space. The way it records it is a little bit different than all intra. And so you see the megabyte per second goes down, and really it's gonna be a little bit of a smaller file. So I like working with Cinema 4K 10-bit, 100 megabytes per second at 24p. Then there you have the Cinema 4K 8-bit, so that's gonna be a 420 8-bit at 100 megabytes per second. So it's not taking in as much information and you're not gonna have as much color information in there as well. So another one of the settings I really like using is the 4K 8-bit, 150 megabytes per second, but this is at 60p. And so you see that the resolution changes from 4096 to 2160 from the Cinema 4K to a regular 4K 3840 by 2160. And so one of the things that you want to pay attention to is that the output is going to be 5994. So it's actually going to be a 60 frames per second file that you can adjust in post. And again, this is a 420 8-bit long GOP, and I really like using this because it's quick turnaround. All right, so scrolling down here, things are gonna change just a little bit for us. So we have this 4K 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second at 30p, or down here, 4K 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second at 24p, which that's where I would be. So we're gonna have a 420 8-bit long GOP file, 100 megabytes per second, which is a little bit smaller than 150, but it's still gonna be a pretty good file size. But one of the things that changes is that VFR available. So with this setting, you're gonna have variable frame rate available. Now, if you haven't seen my video on variable frame rate, make sure you check that out right up here. So what that's gonna do is adjust that image that you're shooting at 60 frames per second, and it's actually gonna put it into a 23.98 frames per second file. So it's making those adjustments for you in camera, which is a great feature of the GH5. All right, and so then from there, we get into some of the full HD options, and you can see that then our resolution changes to 1920 by 1080, and you have a 60p option, but then you also have a 10-bit option. You also have the 8-bit option, 100 megabytes per second, 24p, with the variable frame rate available. And so with this variable frame rate, you're able to go up to 180 frames per second in full high definition at 1920 by 1080, and it's gonna convert that file from 180 or 120 frames per second to 23.98 or 30 frames per second if you're shooting that. So the main record quality features that I use, let's go over that again. A lot of times I'm gonna use that Cinema 4K 10-bit, but you do have to have a pretty powerful computer to process these files. So I'm gonna use Cinema 4K 10-bit 150. I'm also gonna use 4K 8-bit 150, but at 60 frames per second. Another one that I'm gonna use quite a bit is the 4K 10-bit, 150 megabytes per second, 24p. Then the other one I use is the 4K 8-bit at 100 megabytes per second because the variable frame rate is available, and I can use 60 frames per second, go all the way down to 2 frames per second if I want to do some type of hyperlapse, that type of thing in 4K. And then the other main one I use is the full HD 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second because of the variable frame rate going all the way to 180. I don't use 180, I use 120, but it's great to have awesome 120 on the GH5, especially with the IBIS. Now we know the GH5 has some great color profiles like the natural color profile, Cine-D, Vlog. So we're just gonna take a look at those and the settings that I have that I think give a pretty good picture. I know that I've been happy with it when I've used these. And we'll also take a look at the different IRE levels and those types of things for these different color profiles. So the first one I'm gonna start with is Vlog, and we all know that the Vlog is a separate purchase for the GH5 or the GH4. And one of the things to remember about this Vlog that you purchase the key that comes in a box and you have to upload to your GH5. One of the things to remember is that it is a light version of the log profile. So you're not gonna have the full S curve that you normally would in a regular log profile. And so when we actually go into some of the color adjustments, one of the things that we're gonna notice is that once I get over here is that there's not gonna be a whole lot of changes that I make to this color profile. So really the only options that you have to change are the sharpness and noise reduction. And honestly, I just leave those alone. So I'm gonna go ahead and set my GH5 to Vlog so that we're ready to roll with that. And so I've got Vlog up here. And one of the things to remember is that when you're shooting with Vlog, the best color that you're gonna get is with 10-bit. Now these are gonna be huge files that you're gonna have to deal with, but the 10-bit color is gonna be way better than the 8-bit color, because the 8-bit color, you're gonna see some glitches, it's gonna get a little mushy, and some of those colors are gonna really break down. And where I've seen those colors break down in 8-bit vlog footage is in the sky. So if you have like a blue sky, sometimes it's gonna get a little mushy in there. But I've also seen it in the reds in, you know, some skin tones. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you are in some type of 10-bit color format. So 4K 10-bit, Cinema 4K 10-bit, one of those profiles there you're gonna wanna be in, so that you have the opportunity to get some really good footage with the vlog. So shooting with vlog, you're definitely gonna wanna keep track of where things are on the waveform. And so usually with skin tones, you're gonna keep your skin tones kind of around that 40 to 50 range. 55 probably being the highest, 60 IRE is gonna be pushing it. So that 40 to 50 range is kind of a safe zone for skin tones while shooting vlog. And one of the things I love using are the zebras on the GH5. I think it's a great tool, a great exposure tool. And so you're gonna wanna set your zebras on the GH5. So let's go in here and set these levels. Zebra 1, we're gonna set for skin tone highlights, and Zebra 2, we're gonna set as highlight clipping for the overall image. So when we go in here and we go to set our zebra pattern, our zebra stripes, and remember Zebra 1 is for skin tones, and we don't wanna go, really we don't wanna go above 55. So we're gonna set Zebra 1 to 55 for vlog. And Zebra 2, we're gonna set at 75, because remember, it's not a full S curve. So remember, you can't go up to 90, 95 with the highlights. It's a light version. You don't have that full range. So you have your skin tone highlights set at 55, because you don't wanna go above that, and then you have your overall highlight clipping set around 75. So if you have a few bucks extra laying around, definitely try out vlog for the GH5 and see what kind of shots, see what kind of color, see what kind of dynamic range you can get with that. So this might actually be a good time to talk about something I just did. I just opened a LUTs store on my website. I have a link down in the description. And at the end of this video, I'll just kind of walk you through where to find it. And I got a little something special for you. Maybe a discount code. All right, so if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I really like using the natural color profile, especially for quick turnaround videos. So what you're looking at here is actually shot with the natural color profile. So make sure you check out my video about why I choose the natural color profile really most of the time when I'm shooting with my GH5. All right, so let's go in and let's select the natural color profile. Here we're on vlog, because we just got done with that. So let's go into, it's right after vivid, I believe. There it is, the natural color profile. And let's just walk through some of the settings that I have set up here. So for contrast, I actually set that to -2. And then for sharpness, I take that down all the way. I personally like a little bit softer of an image, so I put that all the way down to -5. You play around with it, you put it where you want to have it. So for noise reduction, I'm gonna leave that at 0. For saturation, I'm gonna take that down 1 notch. And now this one is a little interesting. The hue is a little interesting. I've actually been playing around with this. Normally I keep it around 0, but my friend Nate, who's been using some of the natural color profile as well, actually takes that hue down a notch and puts it at -1. So you play around with that, you see how you like it. I've been using it a little bit with a -1, and I kind of like some of the, you know, skin tones that you're getting, but for right now, I'm gonna actually keep it at 0. So you go test those waters, see what you like with that hue in the natural profile here. So I'm gonna set this as my color profile right now. So one of the things I really like about the natural color profile is I feel like I get some pretty good colors coming right out of the image, especially in the greens and blacks. And if you go and check out that video that I mentioned earlier, I'll kind of explain a little bit of that more. So now that we're in the natural color profile, what we're gonna do is go in and adjust the zebras again, because this is totally different than vlog. vlog. And so our levels on those zebras can be way different. So for skin tones on the waveform, for interviews, that type of thing, usually I keep that around 60 to 70 IRE with this natural color profile. So when we go into the zebra pattern, that's kind of determining where we're gonna set those zebras. And zebra 1, remember, which represents, you know, skin tones and the highlights on the skin tones, that type of thing. I am actually going to set that at 70 because, remember, I don't want to go above 70 IRE for skin tones on the waveform. And so zebra 2, which represents our highlight clipping, the overall image, I'm gonna actually set that up to 95 because we have a lot of give when it comes to that highlight. So there we have our zebra pattern set up for the natural color profile, and we're ready to shoot. And I found that if I stay within that range, I usually get a pretty good overall image, even though I don't have the dynamic range like I would have with like the log profile. So what's your favorite color profile to shoot in with the GH5? Let me know down in the comments. I kind of like this conversation because there is definitely a wide range of color profile shooters with the GH5. All right, so the last color profile that we're gonna talk about is Cine-D. And now I'm not a huge Cine-D shooter, but I did put together recently a video of color grading some Cine-D footage. But I had the settings kind of extreme because I was just kind of running some tests, and I actually had the settings at -5, -5, -5, And I don't think that's necessarily the recommended version for that, but I was just running some tests and I wanted to try it with that. All right, so let's go in here and choose Cine-D to make sure we're rolling with that one. And that is not too far away. Right after some of the customs, we'll go to Cine-D. I don't recommend the -5, -5, 0, -5, 0. So you're definitely gonna wanna play around with some of these settings, but from what I've seen, Ryan Harris, who is a big Cine-D shooter, his settings seem to work pretty well with this Cine-D profile. And obviously check out his videos, but what he's gonna do is he's gonna put his contrast at -1, and he's going to put the sharpness all the way down to -5. The noise reduction, he's gonna leave at 0. Saturation, he puts down to -1, and then he leaves the hue at 0. And again, I don't know if this would be similar to the natural color profile where you might want to play around with that hue a little bit, take it down a notch, see if you're getting better skin tones. That's one of the things I've noticed with Cine-D is that the skin tones sometimes are off. I don't know, are you a Cine-D shooter? Let me know down in the comments if you've noticed anything with the Cine-D skin tones. So maybe play around with those settings just a little bit, maybe take that hue down and see if you get a little better skin tones. All right, so now we have our Cine-D settings up and ready to roll. And a lot like the natural color profile, those waveform settings are gonna be very similar to the natural color profile. So you're gonna kind of look for skin tones within that 60 to 70 range. And again, when you go into the zebra pattern, you are going to set your skin tones at 70, and then zebra 2, which is gonna represent your highlight clipping for the overall image, you're gonna keep around 95. So I haven't noticed really any difference from the natural color profile to using Cine-D with some of these settings. You can really just kind of keep those zebras together. Now, one of the things that you're gonna wanna do is set up a shortcut so you can kind of shuffle through those zebras real quick. And I just use the up button here on the GH5, and I can go and I can switch the zebra stripes really quick, turn them off, go to the skin tones, go to the overall image, and then I know that my highlights will be clipping at those different percentages. Now, I know I've done some exposure videos in the past, and I encourage you to go check those out, but this one is a very quick tutorial on really, I think, the 3 best ways to get perfect exposure on the Panasonic GH5. And this is really going back to the basics of the GH5, and it would be very similar on like the GH5 Mark II or the GH5S. So if you have any of those cameras, it'd be a very similar setup to what I'm gonna be doing here. If you're like me, you might be a run and gun type GH5 user, and that's where the zebra stripes come in super handy when gauging exposure. So when you're monitoring your video on this little LCD screen, the zebra stripes are gonna tell you what is overexposed, but you need to set those zebra stripes to the different types of color profiles that you're using. And that's where this comes in. And let's take a look at the menu right here. So I'm gonna go in and we're gonna set the zebra stripes, and we're gonna go to the third menu option and go to monitor display. And then somewhere in here within these, 7 or 8 different categories, you'll find zebra pattern. And that is where we're gonna set our zebra patterns. Now it is gonna depend, like I said, on the color profile that you're using. A lot of times I'm using the natural color profile, and so what I'm gonna do is actually set my zebra 1 to 95, and that is gonna peak those highlights out at 95%. So I know that in my image, anything above there, I'm not gonna get any of that information in those highlight areas. And the 95% would be the same for like the Cine-D profile if you like using that color profile. So I'm gonna go there, set my zebra 1 to 95%, and then I am good to go back to the screen. And then I can tell once I start overexposing my image, like things here look pretty good, but once I start overexposing my image, let's just take the ISO up. So now you can start seeing some of those zebra stripes creep in. So I can take it up even higher, and now it's really just all zebra stripes. So I know that image is gonna be overexposed. So I just take my image down to where those zebra stripes just disappear. Now, one of the things that you want to do when you expose your image with zebra stripes is really just take it all the way up until you're just getting those zebra stripes. So once you start seeing those zebra stripes kind of creep into the image, maybe take it 1 notch down, and then you know that you're gonna have a really well exposed image as a final product. So I said natural color profile is at 95%, Cine-D is at 95%. So if you're using Vlog L, then you're gonna wanna set your zebra stripes at 80 because it is a light version of Vlog, and so you don't have that full curve, and so you're gonna set your zebra stripes at 80 as the peak. And if you like using the HLG color profile, which is, I think, a fantastic color profile, you're gonna wanna set your zebra stripes peaking at 90. And like I said, take your image just right up to where those zebra stripes are starting to show, and then you know you're gonna have a well exposed image. So the next tool that we're gonna use kind of goes along with the zebra stripes is actually going to be the waveform. So we can go in here and we can actually set the waveform on our screen on the GH5, and we just go to the very first menu setting, and then we just go down to waveform vector scope, and we click on that and we can punch in the waveform. So it's not showing up on my screen recording here, so I'll just take a shot of the back of the camera with my phone. So this is the waveform on the GH5, and so you have this solid line right up at the top, that's going to be 100, and then the bottom line, bottom solid line that you see is going to be 0. So the highlights and the darks right there, and so you can see that this gives an overall view of what the image looks like, and as soon as you put something in there, you know it's going to adjust the image so that you can see what is exposed properly and what's not exposed. And this is where you need to learn your IRE figures. So your IRE figures kind of determines where the different exposure parts fall on this waveform. So if you're exposing for, let's say, skin tone, if you're shooting, you know, some kind of interview, and this is where maybe having a gray card comes in handy, because you can put that gray card up, which represents skin tones, and you can really determine where that falls on this waveform in between, you know, 40 to 60, depending on what color profile you're using, and you want to be able to nail that on this waveform. So I would highly suggest using some type of gray card, maybe something like this, and you can really determine where that gray would fall on this scale. But it'll also show you different parts of the scene and where those fall on the exposure scale. So if part of the scene is really dark, you'll see that it will be near that 0 line on the waveform. Now, a lot of times I'm not using the waveform for B-roll exposure. I'm using it mostly for interview exposure and making sure I have whoever is in the video have of them exposed correctly. But the waveform is something that you're gonna wanna take advantage of on the GH5. All right, the third tool that I'm gonna talk about is the histogram. Now, the histogram is not something that you want to fully and solely rely on. These other two, like the zebra stripes and the waveform, are gonna be a more accurate representation, but the histogram is gonna give you a good overall feel of what the exposure looks like on your GH5. So let's go into the menu, and what we're gonna do is go to, again, that third option, go to monitor, display, and then somewhere in here you're gonna have the histogram option, and we're gonna click on that and we're just gonna turn it on. Now what you can do is move this anywhere on the screen that you'd want it. Usually I kind of keep it right over to this side, and so we can exit out of that and go back to the main screen, and now we have that histogram right on our monitor that we can kind of keep on all the time, just to give us an overview of where this image falls. Now you can see that the image I have here is actually kind of on the darker side. So like the left side of the histogram is gonna represent your blacks, and the right side of the histogram is gonna represent your whites. And so we can, you know, make some adjustments as we go. And now you can see that this might be a little bit better balanced of an image, and I just bumped the ISO up just a little bit. So like I said, the histogram is not gonna be something that you're gonna wanna fully rely on, because it doesn't always give the best representation of the image. A lot of times in like photography, you would use the histogram a little bit to kind of balance out the image, but things are changing so much in video that sometimes the histogram's just gonna be shifting like that, and it'd be better to kind of monitor your exposure with more of like the zebra stripes and the waveform. But I like having the histogram on my screen just to kind of give just an overall feel of where I'm at in the image, and if I need to move it to the right just a little bit and expose a little bit higher, that way I know kind of where things are. Bloop. If you're new here, my name is Caleb, and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Now, in so many situations, nailing your white balance in camera before you go to the edit can really speed up the process, especially if you have clients that are saying, get the job done. Having white balance correct in camera is muy importante, especially when going into color grading, and if you're shooting vlog, it can just speed up the whole process, make life easier. So I'm just gonna go through some of the white balance settings on the Panasonic GH5, and the one that I use the most often that I tend to get some pretty good results with. But the Panasonic GH5 does have some great tools for white balance, and I highly encourage you to use them. So let me know down in the comments, what is your go-to white balance selection tool in the GH5? Where do you find the most success finding white balance when using your GH5? All right, to go through some of these settings, I'm not gonna stay cooped up here in the studio. Some of it might be in the studio, but let's go test some of these settings out. All right, so the first setting that is probably gonna be the easiest to use would be the auto white balance setting. Now, you're gonna wanna use this very sparingly, but like I said, it's really easy to use, and it's really for run and gun type situations. In my experience from using the auto white balance, it's actually pretty good. I would never use it on a regular basis, but in some situations, I actually found that it worked pretty well. And under the white balance option, it's the very first setting. Now, with all these settings, you're able to kind of fine tune it a little bit by hitting the adjust button. And so if you need to go in there and kind of make some, fine tuning adjustments, you can definitely do that. Now, auto is auto for a reason, but on the GH5, you can actually rely on it for a lot of different types of shots. Now, what I have found is that it's not always accurate when there's like quick lighting changes. So for example, if you're going from one room to another, there might be a little bit of a delay in the white balance response. Another thing I've noticed with the auto white balance is that if you have a longer type shot, let's say maybe like a talking head, there could be some white balance adjustments that it makes during the shot. So you kind of have to watch that and make sure there's not too much change going on, especially if you're using like a window to light your subject. There's gonna be some changes in that white balance throughout that longer shot. Now, some of the times where you might want to use the auto white balance might be for, you know, vlogging or possibly even real estate. But even in those situations, you want to make sure it's like a consistent cloud cover or consistently sunny. That way you're not going back and forth all the time from different types of white balance. All right, so the next type of white balance setting that you find on the GH5 are actually the GH5 presets. And again, these are easy to use, but you're gonna wanna use them sparingly. So if you're in a run and gun situation and you need to quickly set your white balance, these might be the options for you. So you have the daylight setting or the sun setting that I kind of like to call it. And that's gonna give you some pretty accurate color in sunny situations. And the next one is the cloud. And so that's gonna actually warm up the image a little bit because when it's cloudy, it's a little bit bluer of a tone. So that cloud is actually gonna warm it up just a little bit. Then you have a couple of these other options like the house and this tungsten light, which this is gonna really turn the image blue because a lot of times you're under those lights that are really yellow. So this is gonna compensate for that and make the image bluer. But again, you're gonna wanna use these sparingly. And you know, in all honesty, I would almost rather use the auto setting than some of these presets sometimes. But you'll really wanna use these presets in situations where the lighting is gonna be really consistent. So maybe like a sunny day at the beach, or if you're shooting a rainstorm, you wanna make sure that the setting is consistent because if anything changes, these presets are not gonna change. All right, so here is the GH5 white balance setting that I use the most, and that's actually the selection mode. And so in order to use a selection mode, you're gonna have to have something like a white piece of paper or a gray card, but you're gonna select your white balance based off that point. So in order to use this, you have to make sure that your selection, your gray card or white piece of paper, is properly lit. And then have your selection fit as much of the box as possible. Then you just hit the set button and it should be dialed in from there. I highly recommend this gray card that I'm using here, which is perfect for any type of travel or run and gun. Just folds right up and goes into a little pouch. You're gonna have to change the white balance for every different lighting situation. But this is where I find that I get the most accurate white balance. Another thing you might want to do is just have that white piece of paper or the gray card actually in one of the shots so that you can bring it up in your edit program and make any fine-tuning adjustments that you need to. I'm actually going to put an affiliate link down in the description for this gray card because I think it's perfect for a lot of run and gun situations and just having along with you. So if you want to check that out, it'd be awesome if you use that link. And again, you're going to have the ability to fine-tune this selection. But what I found is that if it's lit properly, that white balance selection should be very accurate. Now, pretty much all the time I use this for interviews or in a studio setting like this. Really, any time that I can use this gray card, that's what I'm gonna use. All right, so the last white balance setting that I'm actually gonna go through is actually here in the studio, and I'm gonna be setting my white balance to the color of light that I have. Now, the light that I have here in my studio is set at 5500K, and so I can actually go into my white balance menu here on the GH5 and set my color to 5500K. So let's go in here to the white balance, and I'm just gonna go, so you see all these different settings, just go to the first Kelvin setting right here, and you just hit white balance K set, and that's gonna bring you to this picture right here. Now, right now I have it set at 9500, and so what I'm gonna do is match my studio light with the white balance on the GH5, and so I'm just gonna take it down to 5500K, and now I have set my white balance Kelvin setting the same as my studio light. So hit the set button, and then you're ready to go. And this might be good for if you are, you know, consistently having the same lighting in a studio like this. You might just wanna set your white balance at 5500 or 5600 Kelvin and keep it that way in the studio, and you'll be good to go every time you turn on your camera. And so like I said earlier, I primarily use a selection mode with a gray card. I feel like that's usually when I get the best results. But there are times when I use auto, and I'm not ashamed of that because the GH5 has shown me that it can be reliable in certain situations. I do use it sparingly, but it's worked for me in the past. So what is this cinematic feature of the GH5 called the variable frame rate? Well, first of all, it's gonna give you in-camera processed slow motion. But the variable frame rate can also be used for like a hyperlapse or maybe even a time lapse. So what you're able to do is go in and pick variable frame rate and pick any frame rate from 2 frames per second all the way up to 180 frames per second. And that is gonna process in camera, it's gonna process to whatever frame rate you like, whether that's 24 frames per second or if you shoot in 30 frames per second, it is gonna process that file as a 24 frames per second file. Okay, I don't know, that might be a really bad way to explain it, but basically you're getting in-camera processed files, slow motion or hyperlapse in your desired frame rate, like 24 frames per second for me. Maybe 30 frames per second for you. And this is such a great feature of the Panasonic GH5 because you can get that slow motion footage right out of camera without that extra step of processing it in your editor. So the GH5 also has a 4K 60 option. So would you use that over the variable frame rate? Would you use variable frame rate over the 4K 60 option? They're kind of a little bit different. So why would you use one over the other? All right, so first of all, the 4K 60 option is gonna be 150 megabyte per second file. So it's gonna be a little bit better of a file. Still an 8-bit 420 file, but you're gonna have a little bit more information in that file. The variable frame rate options, whether you're in 4K 8-bit or full HD 8-bit, those are gonna be 100 megabyte per second files. But don't get me wrong, those are still outstanding file sizes and you're gonna be able to get a bunch of information. Like a lot of times I can take that 120 frames per second file at full HD 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second, and I can upscale that to 4K in Premiere Pro, and I think it still looks good, especially for YouTube content or if you're making stuff for Instagram or Facebook. You can upscale that 100 megabytes per second file and it's still gonna look really good. So another reason you might use that 4K 60 option over variable frame rate is that you are gonna have the audio files. So we're gonna talk about this a little bit more, but there's no audio files with the variable frame rate. It cuts the audio and you only have the video file. So you better be good at, sound effects and have a lot of sound design in your video if you cannot capture those audio files while you're shooting. So if you rely heavily on audio, you might wanna shoot that 4K 60. Another thing, that 4K 60 option is the output for if you're going into an external recorder and recording, 10-bit 422, 4K 60, that type of thing. You will use that option to get the external recording. So how do you get to the VFR option? Let's jump into the menu and we'll just go through some of the settings. Some of the settings that I use, you can use something else, but it's super easy. All right, so one of the things that you can check first is the system frequency, and variable frame rate works both with the NTSC and Cinema. Here in the States, I shoot in NTSC, and Cinema mode is also a great feature. I use a little of both, but one of the things that we're gonna do first of all is go in and change the shutter angle. So right down here, first of all, we see that this is a number and you're gonna wanna make that an angle. So this is like your shutter speed, but we want to turn it to a shutter angle. So we'll go into menu and go to this first option, and under the first page of the first menu option, you have SS gain operation. And what we're going to actually do is change that to angle right there. So now what we see is that we have a different number. It's actually 180, and 180 means that that is going to be double whatever our frame rate is. So if we're shooting 24, it's obviously gonna be double that. If we're shooting 60 frames per second, it's gonna be double that at 120, so that type of thing. And then we have a few different options when it comes to setting the variable frame rate. First of all, you're gonna wanna be in either 4K 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second at 24, or you could also do this at 30 frames per second, or full HD 8-bit, 100 megabytes per second at 24. So let's go first of all to the full HD, and we're gonna go in and set our variable frame rate. And that is also gonna be under the first menu option. And right now I have it set as on, and so you can turn it off or we can go and set it. And so with the full HD at 24 frames per second, we have frame rates of 2 frames per second all the way up to 180. So 180 can kind of get a little mushy. I don't personally use it that often. I found the sweet spot is kind of that 120. And so you see we're going to be shooting at a frame rate of 120 frames per second, but the recorded frame rate is going to be 24 frames per second, which will meet and match our timeline or other footage or whatever we're shooting at there. All right, so now let's go into the 4K option, 8-bit. We'll select that, and then we'll go into menu, go back to the menu, and let's set that. And with that option, we have all the way from 2 frames per second. And this would be really cool if you were on like a gimbal and doing a hyperlapse. I want to try that sometime to see what that looks like. This goes all the way up to 60 frames per second and the recorded frame rate of 2398, which we want in our editing timeline. So another thing you might want to do with some of these is actually set up some shortcuts. So here I have my function 3 button set up as the different record quality, so I can easily get to, you know, full HD or 4K 8-bit. But then I have my function 1 button right up here, function 1. If I hit that, it's gonna go to my variable frame rates. And so then I can right from there hit it, set it. It's gonna be 4K 60, and remember my shutter angle is going to be double whatever my frame rate is. Another option that you could do is go up here and set the dial knobs. So you can set these as different customs. So I have custom 1 set at 120 frames per second. That way if I go there, it's automatically going to be there. The ISO we can adjust, that type of thing, but rather than going in, hitting a bunch of different buttons, I can do that. And then my C2 here I have at, you know, the 4K 8-bit 60 frames variable frame rate. So if you're a run and gun GH5 shooter, maybe setting up these custom buttons might not be a bad idea for you. So I'm just gonna go through some shots that I've done in the past, whether that's client work or some of this YouTube content that I'm doing. I'm just gonna show you some of those shots, the different variable frame rates that I've been using. And you can really see how it's processed and how smooth it is. I love using the variable frame rate on the GH5, and take a look at some of these shots here. I'll put up what I'm using in each clip. So we all know that the in-body image stabilization on the GH5 is absolutely fantastic. And I'm a firm believer that the VFR and the IBIS of the GH5 were a match made in cinematic heaven. Seriously, these two things were made for each other. When you're shooting at full HD at 120 frames per second, it is almost like you're on a gimbal. In fact, I would even argue that some of the shots are almost a little better than on a gimbal because it shows a little bit more natural movement in the shot. I mean, you're obviously not gonna be running down the road, but you can get some really nice, smooth motion, which makes shooting handheld with the GH5 just a great overall experience. So with the variable frame rate, you are gonna have to make some sacrifices. One of the sacrifices that you're gonna make is that megabyte per second. You're gonna lose 50 megabytes per second. If that is something that causes you issues, you're probably gonna wanna shoot that 4K 60 option. Another sacrifice that you're gonna make is there's not gonna be any audio. So you're gonna either need to record your audio separate or step up your sound design game with some sound effects, which I do have a couple links down in the description for libraries of sound effects and music if you're looking for those. Another sacrifice that you're gonna make is that you don't have any autofocus option with the variable frame rate. It basically shuts down and shuts off the autofocus option. So make sure you're practicing your manual focus. Not that a lot of us are using autofocus on the GH5 anyway. I mean, that's pretty common knowledge. But one of the things I like using is the focus lock, and you lose that as well, at least from what I've seen. Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, I've got a little bit different style of video. I'm just gonna be sitting at the computer, color grading some Cine-D footage from the GH5, and I'll just show you kind of how I went from this image to this image. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. My wife and I went out for some coffee and it was starting to snow just a little bit, and so I thought I'd take some Cine-D footage just with the snow falling and, you know, with her puffy hood. I just thought it looked really good. So let's go ahead and we're gonna take the clip here and we're just gonna create an in-out point, and I'm just going to drag the video down to a new timeline. Now, a lot of this should be very similar if you're in, you know, Final Cut Pro or if you're in Resolve. I don't know exactly those how to go about doing all of this in those programs, but the process should be very, very similar. And I use Adobe Premiere Pro, as you can see, and I usually get some pretty good results with it. So, okay, so now I have the clip down in the timeline. Actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring just a couple more clips down, maybe this one of her walking down. Let's take this one. There's a little bit more snow in here. So let's take this one, and I'm just going to create an out point, and I'm just going to drag this down, and we're not going to edit this part to any music or anything, but I just want to show you how when I go to, you know, color grade some of this footage, how I do it so that it's kind of a little bit easier of a process going from clip to clip and that type of thing. So, okay, so we have this first clip right here. She's just drinking some coffee that we got. And let me tell you something, it was really good coffee. We also got a chocolate chip cookie, and that chocolate chip cookie was amazing. All right, so I'm gonna go down here. I'm gonna go to a new item, and I'm gonna create a new adjustment layer. And so I have got that adjustment layer, and I've got all the settings where I want them. And now I did shoot this footage in 4K 60 on the GH5, and I actually went and interpreted all of this footage and took it down from that 60 frames per second down to the you know, 23.98. And to do that, I just, you know, highlighted everything you can see here, and then I went to modify and interpret footage, and that'll come up, and I click on this assume this rate is, and then I type in 23.98, and that'll slow all those clips down to where I want it in a 24 or 23.98 timeline. So all right, so now I have the adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring it up here. And now this is where I'm going to make some of my, you know, color adjustments. Basically, I'm just going to, you know, do some of the correction. Now I did white balance before I started shooting, and so things should be fairly white balanced. But you'll see that when I go to put my LUT on, it'll make it look a little colder. So we'll have to make some adjustments coming up. But for right now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make my adjustments, and you can see the you know, Cine-D is a little bit flat. It's not super flat like a vlog, but it is flatter. And so I had my zebra stripes on the GH5. I had those set to 95, so that at 95, I was starting to get those highlight clips. So I knew to keep everything kind of below that. and everything was pretty well balanced as I was shooting these different clips. So there shouldn't be much like exposure changes and things like that. But the very first thing I'm going to do is, and this is pretty much the process I use all the time. I don't shoot in Cine-D a lot, but even just if I'm shooting in the vlog or if I'm shooting in natural, this is kind of the process that I go with. And so I'm going to take this first adjustment layer. And let's see, I'm just going to extend it here to the edges. But okay, so I'm going to take these blacks and bring up my scopes, and I'm going to bring these blacks down to where I'm almost just like kissing that 0 line right there. And then I'm going to bring the whites up until, and I don't want things clipping. I'm going to go probably like the whitest part, probably about 95, somewhere in that range right there. Maybe down just a little bit so it's closer to 90. I don't think I want it blown out too much there. So maybe somewhere in there, kind of that, like the whitest part, like right up here in the sky, like that part is going to be in the 90s, right? Like basically right on that 90 line right there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is, since it's a little bit flatter of a profile, I'm actually going to bring saturation up here. And so I go and click on the creative tab, and I'm just going to bring the saturation up. Oh, sorry, I just blew into the mic. My bad. I'm going to bring it up to a point where I like it. I might need to adjust this a little bit more later on once I get the LUT on. But I just want to bring the saturation up just a little bit, just to add just a little bit more depth to it. Okay, and then after I'm at that point, I go down to curves, and this is still all first on this first adjustment layer, because here's what we're going to do. We're going to make these corrections on the first adjustment layer. I'm going to create another adjustment layer and put the LUT on, and that LUT layer is going to be able to go just across the board here. And then we'll go back to this first adjustment layer and make some final tweaking to get the image really where I want it. So, okay, so now I'm here. I'm going to be making an S curve over here, and I'm just going to, there's just a little bit more that I want to bring down in those blacks. And so now you can really start seeing a change in the image. And you know, before when I was making those slider adjustments, I left a little bit of headway there, so I was able to come into this curve and really make those adjustments that I wanted to make. So I think I'm happy with this, and you can see this image really starting to take shape. Okay, so here's some of those basic corrections that I made. I'm gonna take it off, and there's the flat image from the Cine-D, and here we have some of the corrections I made. And as you can tell, I mean, it's already looking pretty good. I mean, it's pretty good right there. So, okay, next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring up another adjustment layer, and this is actually where I'm going to add my LUT. And so, like I said, this LUT one is going to go all the way across the board because I want a consistent look, and then I can go back here and make other adjustments in this first one. So this first adjustment layer. So this top one is where I'm going to put my LUT on, and I'm going to use the LUT that I have for you for free, the CH YouTube LUT, and I'm just going to apply it to this, and now we have a dramatic change in the image. So let me take this off. So there is the Cine-D right out of camera at 4K 60. It's 8-bit. Cine-D and 8-bit is, I feel like it's all right to use. I mean, I get a good image, good quality. Now here is the first level of adjustments that I made, and here's the second level of adjustments I made with the LUT, and that is just applying the LUT right there. Now with this image, I think it would be fine because you're outside, it's kind of snowy, so you have the snowflakes, so you're all right with a cold image, something like that. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to warm it up a little bit, because in some of these gray areas, I just want like over here in this building, I just want some of those a little bit warmer. So what I'm actually going to do now that I have the LUT applied, so I'm going to go back to that first adjustment layer, and now I can go in and just kind of fine tune some of those adjustments. And so the very first one I'm going to do is go back to the basic correction, and I'm going to just take this temperature slider under the white balance. I'm just going to warm the image up just a little bit. And as you can see, you can already start seeing some of those changes in like that building in the background, and kind of up here in the furry hood that my wife has there. And so I think I'm going to keep going and keep warming it up to a point where I like it. And this is the beauty of this thing. Like, you can make it however you want to make it. It is your video. You can make the adjustments, warm it up as much as you want, make it as cold looking as you want. And so I still have some pretty good levels here. If you go over to the scopes, everything seems to be pretty balanced, and I'm happy with a warmer image like this, and I'm happy with where all the scopes are. So like I said, you make the adjustments that you would want to make. But for right now, I want to make this temperature just a little bit warmer in this image. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do as well is it's a little, I don't know if it's a little just too contrasty for me. I'm going to just bring the contrast up a little bit. And this might change as I go along, and it will definitely change from shot to shot. But I think I'm going to kind of expand these scopes here a little bit, and I'm just going to bring this up and make it just a little, not less contrasty, I guess, but more contrasty, and just kind of deepen the image a little bit. And that's kind of what that contrast does. So I'm going to bring it up to, I don't know, maybe somewhere in there. And I think what that's going to do is just really like add more depth to the image. And I know earlier I said less contrast, but actually what I meant to say was add more contrast, just to bring in some more depth here in the background. Let's see here. I think what I'm going to do next is it's a little bit dark kind of in these shadow areas. And so I'm going to just raise the shadows a little bit, and I'm going to bring the shadows up maybe right about there. I think I think that looks good. That just kind of lightens up those shadows just a little bit to get a little bit of those details in there. Now, and you'll see in my scopes here, I don't have any blacks that are crushed, and my highlights are still very close to where I want them, around that 90 to 95 range. So I'm still happy with where that's at. I usually like bringing the highlights down just a little bit so it's not overwhelming in the highlights. I think that's good. I think that is an overall good image. Now, one of the things I want to do, since my wife is standing right here in the middle, sipping her coffee, it's snowing. Since she's kind of centered right here in the image, I think what I'm going to do is actually add a little bit of a vignette around this. And I think that's just going to help her in the center of the image just, pop a little bit more, and it's going to add a little bit more contrast to these edges. And so let's go down to the vignette, and I'm going to just bring that down. And as you'll see, that right there really creates the darker edges and really brings your attention right to the center of the image. And I really think it adds a lot of depth to the sides as well. So let's just play through this. Oh yeah, I like that look. Okay, so let's take a look with the LUT off and with the adjustment layer off. So there is the start of the image, and here is what we ended up with right there. And I think that looks pretty good. And don't forget, you can download that LUT for free along with a few others, and I'll have the link down in the description. Now, let me show you something with going on to another clip. Now, usually what I do when I'm color grading is I will take the changes that I made in one clip and I'll drag it over to the next clip. But what you're gonna see is that you're gonna actually see some clipping in some of these blacks. So like on this part of the image right here, that's basically this window area, is like you're gonna start seeing some clipping. And I personally don't like clipping in my image. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna separate these clips right there. And now I have a separate, you know, adjustment. It's close to what this is gonna be, but now I can make adjustments just for this clip. And so I can go back up here and I can go to this black slider, and I can just bring those blacks up here and get them to a point where I'm happy with them not crushing. And there, I might just need to bring actually the curve up just a little bit too. But right there, I'm happy with that. The blacks in that window are no longer crushing, and I still have my LUT adjustment layer right here. So I take that off, and then I take the adjustments that like the color correction adjustments off. So that for this image, that's what it looks like. And back on. And so what I feel like this does is that when you do it this way, it kind of creates a consistent look throughout your whole video. And now if there's some clips where you have some major changes, then you'll have to, you know, obviously make those adjustments for each clip. You know, color grading is not just slapping a LUT on for the whole thing. I wish it was that easy, but you'll need to go in and you'll need to make those little tweaks, those little adjustments to get it where you want to be. All right, so I'm gonna leave you with this just little segment that I put together with some music. Of us on a little walk in the snow, grabbing coffee. Again, make sure you comment down below anything that you do when you go to color grade your videos that might help the, you know, GH5 community. And, you know, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. All right, so here we are in the timeline, and we're gonna color grade some of this natural color profile that I shot on some client work at some adventure camps. So the very first thing that we're gonna do is go and just create a new item, and we're just gonna create a new adjustment layer. We have all the settings that we want, 1920 by 1080, and the time code is where we want it. So we just hit OK, and that's gonna give us the adjustment layer that we want. Now, if you wanna save a bunch of time with the natural color profile, and you don't want to spend a ton of time color grading and that type of thing, I would highly suggest go down into my description and click on the free LUT download, and that's going to give you this YouTube Punch LUT as well as the deep shadows, gold, and purple sky. But this YouTube Punch is basically what I use for all my YouTube videos, designed specifically for the natural color profile. And so if you want to save a bunch of time, just go download this and it's going to give you some really good looking natural color profile footage. So that's what that looks like. I also have a LUT store set up for you if you want to go beyond just these free downloads. I have a bunch of LUTs that you can purchase on that store. So that will save you a bunch of time when it comes to color grading, natural color profile, GH5 natural color profile footage. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to do this from scratch. So when you go to color grade the natural color profile, it's all about adding depth to the image. Now, you don't have the dynamic range that you would have with like the log profile, and some of the footage might be a little bit overly saturated. So the main thing is just adding a little bit more contrast to the image and, you know, adjusting the colors a little bit so that it's not so saturated. And all of this is assuming that you in camera have nailed your exposure and nailed your white balance. So real quick up on the screen, I'm just going to toss the settings that I use for the natural color profile. Now, if I'm shooting an interview, that last digit I'll just take down to -1, but pretty much for any type of B-roll, this is what I'm using here. So let's just start on this first clip and we're just going to bring up the adjustment layer here. And you know, I'm just going to drag it so it's just covering this one clip. And so here are a few things that I always do when it comes to color grading from scratch is I'm going to adjust my curve here. So I have a little bit of room to spare down here in the shadows. And so I'm just going to take that and I'm just going to lower it a little bit here. And you can already see that that's adding depth to the image and it's already making the image look better. Now, another thing that I do, and this is already built into the LUTs that I have if you decide to go download those, but I always put just a little bit of a fade in the shadows. I don't totally know why I do that. I just feel like it maybe softens the image up a little bit and it's not so harsh of an image because, you know, the GH5 shoots pretty sharp. Now that I'm still in the curves, another thing that I pretty much always do is I start taking down the saturation in the shadows as well. And you're gonna really see a change in the image here. Now I take the saturation down maybe about halfway. So if I would go all the way down, you can see such a dramatic change in the image. I don't want to make it so dramatic. Remember, I have really good color coming out of the natural color profile, and so I want to keep some of that in here. So here's the shadows without some of that saturation in it. Now, I do that rather than going, you know, here to the creative and just slamming down the saturation of the overall image. And when I fade it, I don't use this fade slider either. I do it in the curve. I just feel like I have just a little bit more control over it. And so while I'm actually here in the creative tab in Adobe Premiere Pro, I'm just going to bring the shadow tint down to the teal, and I'm going to take the highlight tint up to the orange. Now this is a cloudy day, so it's not going to be super teal and orange look, but I just like adding just the teal look to the shadows here, and the highlights I'll just warm up a little bit. So already you can see quite a difference in the image. So here's the first image and there's some of the adjustments that we've made. Now I don't know if you want to call it a cinematic look or whatever you want to call it, but I do feel like it has a little bit more of a cinema feel rather than these overly saturated colors that sometimes come out of the natural color profile. So we still have some room to work with here. So I'm actually going to go to the basic correction tab and I'm just going to add a little bit more depth. Remember, it's all about adding depth to the image. So, we're saved up here. So I'm just going to just add a little bit more contrast to it. And I'm just going to bring the shadows down just a little bit more. See how it's kind of expanding this area? Now the highlights, remember I have the highlights, there's a little bit of a clip right in here, and that's okay. We're making some sacrifices when we shoot with the natural color profile. We don't have that dynamic range. There's a little bit blown out here, but overall, it's a pretty well exposed sky, but I'm just going to bring the highlights down a little bit. And remember, that's just adding depth to the image. So it just, when you bring those highlights down, you can see just a little bit more definition in some of those clouds. So this image is very, very close to where I want it to be. I think actually that looks pretty good right there. But what I could do is just come down here and change maybe some of the hue settings. So maybe I just want to make those trees maybe just a little bit more of like a forest green look to it. So I can just bring down those yellows and greens. And that's, if I bring it up, see, it's going to be a little bit more yellow. That kind of looks like it's in the fall. But if I bring them down here, it just kind of gives it more of like a forest green look there. So, and if I want, I could even, you know, just raise the saturation just a little bit of some of those greens. And I think that gives a really nice look. Now the luminance of this tree right here is a little bit different. So you could go in there and kind of fine tune the luminance levels of this front tree, but I really like how that one is turning out. So I really feel like it gives it a little bit more of a cinema style look. All right, so let's go to another clip here. In this one, we have a little bit more, you know, skin tone and this orange of this guitar. And I actually think it's a Taylor guitar. I'm a Martin player, but you know, we're gonna let it slide for this video here. That's okay. If he wants to play a Taylor, that's all right. All right, so here we have some adjustments that we're going to make with this. And again, I'm gonna go to this curve, and we don't have as much room in the shadows to play with. And so we're not going to take it down too far because we don't want some of these areas right in here to start clipping. But again, I'm just gonna fade up the shadows a little bit, but we do have some room up top. But here we have some clipping that might happen on his knuckles and on the, you know, on the tuning knob right here. So we're not gonna go too far with it, but we are gonna take it up far enough where, like I said, it adds depth to the image. So already you can see a difference. All right, so those are on, and now I'm just going to take out some of the saturation in the shadows and just bring those down maybe about halfway. Again, you can kind of see like the dramatic change that it makes right there, see? So we don't want it to look like this, obviously. So we're just gonna take out some of those shadows. Now I'm gonna go into the creative tab here. And again, I'm just gonna take the shadows down to more of a teal and the highlights up. Right up there. And now I'm kind of worried about these knuckles in here. So I'm actually gonna go to the basic. I'm just gonna bring the highlights down a little bit. I'm gonna bring the contrast up. And now we're still not getting any clipping, which is good. So I have a little bit of space with the shadows that I might just bring down just a little bit right in there. Okay, so right now we see that that's quite a bit different than what we were getting. And now if I had time, I'd probably go in here, and since this is a crash course, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I might actually just kind of play with these greens a little bit and see where I'd want those, you know, kind of like that, those mountains, maybe just a little bit more foresty of a green in there, and maybe just bring that saturation up in those greens just a little bit. And if we really wanted to, we could make this guitar pop. And now this is gonna adjust some of the skin tones as well with these reds, but we don't wanna overdo it, but maybe just having that guitar pop a little bit, and then we can already see kind of in his knuckles there that that's starting to clip just a little bit. So we don't want to take it too far, but this is such a distinguishable part of this picture that having that guitar pop a little bit might be kind of cool. All right, so here is a shot of my wife looking up at the trees. So let's just bring in the adjustment layer. And again, over and over, we're gonna play with this. Now we don't have a ton of space to play with the dark areas of the image because we don't want them to clip, especially right here under her hood, but we do have some space up here that we can just bring up the lighter parts of the image, and that already is adding some depth to the image. And then I'm just gonna fade off those shadows a little bit to soften it up. And I'm going to bring down the shadow, the darker saturation of the image. I'm gonna bring that down a little bit. Now, if you find that's bringing out too much of the saturation, just dial it down just a little bit. Usually I found about halfway works pretty well. And again, I'm just going to bring the shadows into the teal and the highlights up into the orange levels. And I would definitely spend some more time like fine tuning some of these things. This, like I said, is a crash course. So, but overall, I'm liking how this looks. Now, this is a little bit yellow, maybe a little bit too yellow of an image, too warm. And so what I might do is actually just bring this back, bring the temperature back just a little bit. And now I'm kind of liking that. You see how that really has changed the image there. And so then if I want to, I can go in here and kind of change some of these levels. Like there's some greens and yellows in here. And what I can do is bring some of those down and kind of give it a more foresty look, forest green look. Don't want to overdo it. So there you see some of the changes that you can make really easily with the natural color profile. And like I said, they're not dramatic changes. They're not huge changes, but they're just little changes that really enhance the image. It's all about creating that depth and that contrast in the natural color profile image. So let's just go through these again. Here it is with the adjustments on, adjustments off, adjustments on. Next one, adjustments off, adjustments on. Just gives it a little bit more of a cinema style feel to it. Not overly saturated and kind of toned down just a little bit. What's up everyone? In this video, I'm gonna be talking about a few things that will help you master your low light video with the Panasonic GH5. We all know that low light performance is not the greatest with the GH5, but I've got some in-camera tips that should help. Also a couple things that will help if you have a few bucks to spend. Let's talk low light video with the GH5. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012. But this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, it'd be awesome if you hit that subscribe button. Now, it's been known for years that the GH5 just isn't the best option for when it comes to low light video performance. Sony is probably low light king. Canon is great also, but that's one of the trade-offs when you have such a diverse sensor like the Micro Four Thirds sensor, like on the GH5, is that the light sensitivity is nothing like what you would see with a full frame sensor or even a APS-C crop sensor. But I know that you know that stuff because the GH5 has been out for a while and it's been a topic of conversation for a very long time. So we don't need to keep talking about it. These are just some tips that have helped me in low light situations with the GH5. Most of them are adjustments you can make in camera with the GH5, but a couple of them do cost a little extra money to help in those low light situations. At any point during the video, if you have tips about shooting low light video with the GH5, make sure you comment those below so we can help each other out. And don't forget, at the end of this video, I'm gonna read some comments from you guys from my previous video about the natural color profile on the GH5, and that should be a good time. All right, the first tip that I have for shooting a low light video with the GH5 really goes against almost everything that I've been saying on this channel, and it hurts me to say this, but in low light situations, all your exposure tools almost go out the window. So if you're gonna rely on your exposure tools like the histogram or the waveform, you might get a little frustrated because everything is going to be underexposed. Not a lot of light is gonna get in. In some of these low light situations, it might almost be best to try to eye it as best you can. And it really hurts me to say this because the GH5 has such great exposure tools like the waveform and histogram and zebra stripes, but those are just gonna be frustrating to use in low light situations. In things like street videography or wedding videography, you're just gonna need to find as much light as you can and get as close to it as you can. I know for weddings and the reception time, it can be a real struggle to find light. So on the histogram, everything's gonna be to the left and it's gonna be dark. Everything on the waveform is going to be low and possibly even crushed. So in these low light situations, you might need to try to eye it as best as you can. I might get killed in the comments section for saying something like that. But for me, in low light situations, I just have to eye it and try to get the best light that I can and get the best shot that I can in those situations. But I know for me, I've just been frustrated with some of the exposure tools in low light situations because I can never get it high enough without introducing some noise to the image, and I just eye it and go from there. All right, the next tip that I have is shoot in a color profile other than Vlog or Cine-D. Now this kind of goes along with some of the exposure tools, but with Vlog and Cine-D, you really need a good light source to get a good image. So unless you're able to really light up the scene that you're in, I would suggest shooting in something like the natural color profile or a standard color profile or something along those lines. For me personally, in low light situations like that, I would probably never use Vlog or Cine-D just because you need so much light to make those color profiles really work. You might be able to get away with Cine-D, but I almost think Vlog is out of the question. With Vlog and Cine-D, what you'll find in low light situations is that sometimes the image is gonna get a little muddy and it won't be as crisp as you would like it to be. Now I did a whole video on why I like the natural color profile, and one of the reasons is because of the low light performance. Make sure you check out that video right up here. So shoot in something other than Vlog or Cine-D, unless you're able to bring some lights in and really light up the scene. All right, another tip that I've found that works for me in low light situations is that I do not go above 800 ISO. Now in some situations you might be able to go up to 1600 ISO, but once you get to that 800, 1600 mark, you're gonna start introducing noise to your image. And that's what frustrates people so much about the GH5 in low light situations. Now, if you shoot on the GH5S, it might be a little bit different. You might have a little bit more reach with the ISO, but on the GH5, I hardly ever go above 800 ISO. Now you will be able to find some plugins for some of your editors that you'll be able to eliminate noise, but if you can nail as much in camera as possible, that'll save on editing time, it'll save on processing time, and you'll be able to turn out videos faster. So a lot of videos that I've worked on, like in manufacturing, for example, some of those warehouses are pretty dark, but I will never go above 800 ISO. I found at 800, I really don't get any noise. 1600, I start seeing a little bit. It's not terrible, but anything above that is pretty much unusable. All right, the next tip I have for low light video performance with the GH5 is that a lot of times I try to avoid variable frame rates. Now this sucks because using the variable frame rates on the GH5 is just the best. And now you might be able to use 60 frames per second, but a lot of times 120 frames per second, you know, to get that really super smooth, slow motion. Sometimes that's gonna be hard to use in low light situations. And the reason that's hard to use in low light situations is because if you're using the shutter angle, it's gonna double the shutter speed, which is just gonna make the image that much darker. So for really low light situations like street videography, using that 120 frames per second might be out of the picture. But like I said, you might be able to do some 60 frames, which still gives you that slow motion, still looks great, but a lot of times I try to avoid that VFR. If I'm not using variable frame rates, I pretty much shoot everything in 24 frames per second, and with that, I'm able to get some decent light on the sensor. Now, these next couple tips might cost a little extra money if you have some money laying around, but they will help in low light situations with the GH5. And the first one is having a lens that has an aperture of 2.8 or faster. Now, one of the main lenses that I use in low light situations is a Sigma 18-35 with the speed booster. And so that'll give me an aperture of 1.3, which on the crop sensor is more like a 2.8. That would be on like a full frame, but you're able to open that up and let more light in. And then with an ISO at 800, you're able to get a pretty good image. I know another great option would be some prime lenses or cinema prime lenses. And some of them are pretty affordable, like the Rokinon series. And they have some pretty fast aperture speeds that will allow you to open up that aperture and get some great images in low light. I've even used the LUMIX 12-35 2.8 in low light situations, and I've actually thought that has a pretty good image at 2.8 and ISO 800. I'm able to get a pretty decent image in low light. And I actually use some of this footage in my review of that lens, which you can find right up top here. So for low light situations, maybe invest in a lens of an aperture of 2.8 or faster. Now, another thing that'll really help is just purchasing a small little light to illuminate your subject in those low light situations. So something like this, like the Aperture M9, runs pretty cheap, and sometimes all you need is just a little bit of light to light up your subject, and that'll help a lot in those low light situations. So find something like this, a small light that you can just toss on the top of your camera, or you can hold with one hand and shoot with the other. But for not very much money, you're able to light up that scene a little bit, which helps a lot in those low light situations with the GH5. So I'll have some lens options and some light options down in the description if you want to check those out. They're affiliate links, so I mean anything you purchase will help this channel. So I know that you guys have some tips on shooting low light video with the GH5. Make sure you comment those tips below so that we can get a conversation started and help each other out shooting low light video with the GH5. So like I said earlier, we all know that the low light performance on the GH5 is not the greatest, but hopefully some of these tips can help you make your own videos in low light situations. All right, let's talk about this cinema rig for the Panasonic GH5 by SmallRig. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. First of all, I just want to say thank you to SmallRig for sending me all of the components to build out this cinema rig for the Panasonic GH5. Now, SmallRig did send these to me, but they're not paying me to say anything nice about these products. Now, I've been using SmallRig gear for a while now, and I've always been happy with the build quality and usability of their products. So when they reached out to see if I'd make a video, I was more than happy to work with them on building this GH5 cinema rig. All right, so I'm totally using a window to light this. So if the light changes or if there's like flashes with cars going by, my apologies. So what I'm gonna do in this video is just go through each component that makes up this cinema rig. Now, do you need all of these things to make great videos with the Panasonic GH5? I'm always gonna say absolutely not. You don't need these things, but sometimes these pieces of gear, these components, these camera rigs can help in different situations when it comes to filming. So no, you don't need them, but sometimes they are very helpful. And if you wanna check any of these things out, I will have affiliate links down in the description. And if you use those links, that would be awesome and totally help support this channel. So the lens that I'm using, which is a workhorse of a lens, is the Sigma 18-35. Now, when I've had my GH5 rigged up before, the Sigma 18-35 basically always stays on the camera, and I boost the speed with the Metabone speed booster. We're building our rig around the GH5, Sigma 18-35, and the Metabone speed booster 0.71. Now, as far as a monitor for this, any monitor will work, but I'm using the Atomos Ninja 5. So the very first part is you're gonna wanna cage up your GH5. And for that, I have this older model, the 2049 GH5 cage. Now they do have a newer model that was recently released for the GH5 that's a little slimmer, a little sleeker, and it's just a new type of design for the GH5. Now really the cage is the first step because things are gonna build off of that. All right, let's talk about this handle up top. Now this is a rotating NATO handle. It's the wood model HTN 2362. Now this is a rotating handle, so this knob right here you're able to loosen up, and you can flip this handle around if you want to hold it more towards the center of the camera. Now I have the monitor there, so I'm not going to be able to do that, but this is a NATO handle, so that means it has a quick release right here, which you can quickly undo this and release it from the top of the cage. It also has all of these threads in here, as well as the Allen wrench tool that slides and magnetically held right in there. Now, one of the things you're gonna need for this handle is the NATO quick release safety rail right on the top right here. Okay, so I'm just gonna flip this on the side, and we're gonna talk about this base plate right here. This is the base plate with the 15mm rod clamps. This is model 1798. And this base plate right here is gonna allow you to attach to any type of tripod mount. So you can just go real quick, slide it into your tripod. And with this base plate, you're gonna be able to connect these 15mm rods. So you're gonna be able to kind of adjust this on the rods to balance out the rig a little bit. And this base plate is a heavy duty base plate. So if you actually have a bigger camera than the GH5, this base plate will be able to support that. All right, while we're on the base plate, let's just go ahead and talk about these 15mm rods. I'm using the 10-inch rods, and this is model number 1052. So it's gonna allow you to connect accessories like, this follow focus, or if you want to attach a battery pack to the back of the camera to power everything. And one of the things I like about the 10-inch rods is that they're not super long. So you're not gonna have a ton of excess rod, sticking out the front or the back. You'll be able to really easily balance on the 10-inch and allow for a bunch of other accessories. All right, let's talk about the monitor mount. And here I have the swivel and tilt monitor mount, which is BSE 2294. Now this monitor mount supports 5-inch and 7-inch monitors. So you're gonna be able to pivot it 360 degrees and tilt it 150. And it's a free stop, so it's really any position that you put in here. Now this model has some Allen screws that just secure right into the front of the rig or on the top of the rig, depending on where you might want to mount your monitor. Now this monitor mount also has a rubber pad right under here, so where the monitor meets the mount, you're not going to be scratching up the bottom of your monitor. Now one of the things you might want to take into consideration if you are using a top handle like this NATO handle with all these threads and cold shoe mounts, there is a version of this mount, the BSE 2346, that would go right into the cold shoe, or a monitor mount that fits right in this front thread of the handle. So if you want your monitor just a little bit higher so that the handle is not, getting in the view of the monitor, if you want it higher up here, then you can use one of those mounts as well to mount to this handle. All right, next let's talk about this follow focus. And I actually really like this follow focus. This is probably one of the best follow focus systems that I've used. Now it's portable, it's compact, it's mini, it's model 3010. Now the reason you'd use a follow focus is because it's going to give you some pretty precise control, and you're able to set focus points with these little knobs. So if you have your first spot that you want in focus, and then when you set up your shot, you have this second spot right here, you're gonna be able to get a very precise focus without having your hand on the actual ring of the lens. Now, one of the things that you're able to do with this follow focus as well is just pop this up, and then you have really free reign to go as far as you want on the follow focus. But if you want to set those in-out points, you just set those, loosen these up if you need to adjust it, and set those different focus points that you need. Now, being attached to this rail system, you're able to kind of adjust where this is placed. Another one of the things I recommend getting is this seamless focus gear ring if you're not using cinema lenses. But SmallRig does sell this seamless focus gear ring that fits the Sigma 18-35. And this one in particular is model 3293. All right, now let's talk about this huge thing on the front of the lens. And this is the lightweight matte box model 2660. Now, one of the reasons you would use a matte box is to block the sun or other light sources in order to prevent glare and lens flare. So this matte box in particular is lightweight and has the carbon fiber top, which is removable. Now this matte box attaches right to the end of the lens. So obviously there's different size lenses, and so this includes 4 adapter rings in 67mm, 72mm, 77mm, and 82mm through 114mm. Now another great feature of this matte box is the ability to use either 4x4 or 4x5.65 filters, and you can just slide them in right along the side here and tighten them with these top knobs. So if you're in shooting situations where you are not able to use the variable ND or any type of ND filter on your actual lens, you can slide 4x4 or 4x5.65 ND filters in, and they will cover the front of the lens right here. So a lot of great features with this matte box, but the best feature is that it's lightweight. It doesn't add a bunch of excess weight to your rig. What's up everyone? Let's do a quick and easy setup of the Atomos Ninja V and the GH5. Okay, so the very first thing that you're gonna wanna do is make sure you have a high quality, high speed HDMI cable. Now I went with the overpriced Atomos cable, which I know is going to transfer that 4K 60. Now not all HDMI cables are made the same, so if you're not able to shoot 4K 60 with the Atomos Ninja 5, then one of the issues might be the HDMI cable. So you want to make sure you have a high speed HDMI cable connected from the GH5 to the Atomos Ninja V. I almost forgot. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Okay, so the next thing you're gonna do is go into the menu and you're gonna go to the second menu option, and the very first option is the record format. And what you're gonna wanna do is make sure you're in the MOV format. And this is going to allow you to record over that HDMI output. Okay, so while we're in this menu option, scroll down to the fourth option under the second menu item, and you're going to come to the HDMI record output. And this is where everything's going to take place to get all the information out. So the info display, when you record on the Atomos Ninja 5, this info display, if you have it on, it's gonna basically capture everything that's on your screen here. So if you have a grid, it's gonna record that. If you have all of your frame rate information, it's gonna have that. So you're actually gonna wanna turn that info display off to get a clean image. Down convert, just keep that off. And then this is where we're gonna turn on the HDMI recording control, and we're gonna turn that on right there. So when you turn that on, it's gonna allow you to output that record signal through the HDMI, high-speed HDMI cable to the Atomos Ninja 5. And here we're gonna keep the LUT HDMI display off because we're able to put some LUTs on the Atomos Ninja if you don't wanna view the Vlog profile on the Atomos. And one of the ways we're gonna get 4K 60 10-bit 422 is we're going to use the wheel and we're going to scroll down, and here you have the option of recording 422 10-bit or 420 8-bit. We're going to leave it at 422 10-bit. If it's not there, go ahead and click that so that it is set and ready to output 422 10-bit to the Atomos Ninja 5. All right, so now we have the HDMI record output ready to roll. So now we can pick the color profile and the frame rates that we want to shoot at. You should have the HDMI record signal right here, and that tells you that it's ready to output to the recorder to the Atomos Ninja 5. And one of the reasons I got the Atomos Ninja 5 is because of the 4K 60 10-bit 422. And so what we're going to do is we're going to switch over right now. Right now I'm shooting in the 10-bit 24 frames or 23.98, but I'm going to switch that over to the 4K 60. And so I have a shortcut set up to get to my different frame rates and color profiles. And so I'm just going to click that. So on the GH5 it's going to say 4K 8-bit, but we know we switched over the output to 10-bit 422. So we know we're going to get that 4K 60 10-bit 422. And actually shooting on the Ninja V, I've actually kind of liked using the Vlog L, and so we're going to keep the color profile as Vlog because I feel like I have a little bit more control over that file. So now that we have the GH5 set up, let's take a look at the Atomos Ninja V. All right, so once we're on the Ninja V, let's just hit this time code, and it's going to bring up these different settings like input, output, like if you're going out from the HDMI, whether for a live stream or something like that. Record is one of the options that we want to look at. If you have the SSD drive in, you can pick the different formats that you want. I personally like ProRes, but it also has DNX and that you can choose from. Compression, you have the 422, HQ, light. I found that light seems to be working just fine for me. You can pick different timecode options. You can set up how you want the file name. So meters, if you're monitoring, now this isn't a full review, but if you're monitoring audio, you can see the different levels that are coming in. Here's the audio level that you can make some adjustments. The media, this is where you would format your SSD drive. If you have it, see I'm using the Samsung 860 EVO, 1 terabyte. So if I have that capacity full, I can just go ahead and format that drive to the Ninja. You can set up how you want the date, battery levels, and other information in there. Now down at the bottom of the screen here, you have the record option, you have a playback, and this one right here, this yellow one, we're gonna spend a lot of time in there, but that's the monitor option. All right, so let's go into the monitor options. And here, remember, I'm shooting at 4K 60, and it's gonna be 10-bit 422. And here you can zoom in to double check your focus and see where that's at. You do not have the 2x crop when you're in 4K 60, at least right now. So here you can bring up your waveform monitor to see where you're at. If you want your RGB levels, you can see where those are at. One of the things I keep on all the time is the focus peaking, and so there you can see it kind of turn on and off. So I have it set as red, so it's very distinguishable, but you can change the color by going in here and changing the focus peaking to whatever color you want, green, blue, purple. I keep it at red because I feel like that shows up really well. So another thing I have on all the time is the zebra stripes, and so I can set that threshold at 75% if I'm shooting in Vlog L. So I know that once I start seeing those zebra stripes at 75%, I know that I am getting super close to being overexposed and losing that information in those highlights. So you can make those adjustments here. If you want to view your image with a LUT that you've uploaded, which I don't have any on here right now, but I plan on putting some up here, you can pick the different LUTs that you'd want. If you go into monitor, you can view it with the Rec 709. That just kind of helps with exposure, setting exposure. The native is what you'd be viewing from the GH5. And so I have it on Vlog L now, and that kind of shows me what the image looks like with the Vlog. Another feature that I use all the time is the false color, which just helps with determining what's underexposed, what's overexposed, and here you can kind of see I have an underexposed image, except for this background in the back, but pretty much everything is underexposed. But we're not talking about exposure right now, we're talking about this monitor. I'm all right with that. And then you can go in and put the different grids on, and if you want to view it cropped to make sure you have everything in frame, you have the different crop factors here that you can use. As of right now, like you have a 4:3, you have a square, you have Instagram 4:5 or a 9:16 vertical. Personally, I like having the thirds on there, the thirds grid, just like I have on my GH5. I just feel like it kind of helps me determine how to frame up the scene. So there's some of the monitor options right there. So to record, all you do is hit this red record button and it will start recording in whatever format that you have set up. I have ProRes Lite. Now you can also go in and set up to trigger the Ninja 5 from the GH5. And to get there, let's just hit that time card again and we'll scroll over here to input. And here you can find the trigger. I have it set to HDMI. You can hit it, turn it off. And so when you hit the record button on the GH5, nothing's gonna happen on the Ninja. But if you put it on HDMI, once you hit the record button on the GH5, it's gonna trigger the record on the Ninja 5. Just like this. That way you don't have to worry about reaching up or switching hands to hit the record button on the screen. You can just trigger it from the GH5 where you have all of your fingers anyway. And so that's just the quick setup that I have for the GH5 and the Atomos Ninja V.
So I've never delivered anything to a client that has been HDR, so I've never taken the time to shoot HLG on the GH5. But these past few weeks, it's been kind of fun to get to know the HLG color profile and see what it can do. And because I never deliver in HDR, I edit in Premiere Pro, so I need to get my HLG footage to a Rec 709 color space. And for that, I found that the HLG LUMIX LUT for the GH5 has been the quickest and easiest way to do that. Now, I have no affiliation with the LUMIX LUTs or the website, but what I found is that it's been great to work with, and I highly recommend using it. I'll make sure that the LUMIX LUT website is down in the description. I've noticed that the 10-bit HLG footage converted with the LUMIX LUT color grades really well. Even color grading with some of the LUT packages that I have. One is a free download that you can get down in the description, which has my YouTube Punch LUT, which I use for pretty much all my videos. And the rest of the LUT packages are available at my store, and I have a discount code down in the description. So let me know down in the comments some of the secrets that you have if you've been shooting with the HLG color profile. I'd love to know those because, like I said, I'm still a little new to this. Now, most of these settings I'm going to talk about in this video are kind of geared towards that leaming LUT, but in all reality, they're just good practices and good settings to have anyway if you're shooting on the GH5. So the first thing that you're going to want to pay attention to when shooting with the HLG color profile is your shoot setting. You want to be in some type of 10-bit 422 color with 150 megabytes per second or higher. This is very similar to Vlog, that if you're shooting in 8-bit color, you're gonna get some of the banding or color blotches in skins or banding in the sky, that type of thing. So you wanna make sure that you're in 10-bit color. One of my favorite for this is the Cinema 4K 422 10-bit at 150 megabytes per second. So another setting that you're gonna wanna pay attention to is, got a plane. I'm really close to the airport, so that might be a common thing. Jet's taking off, I think. South Dakota Air National Guard. Love it, still going. Another one of the settings that you're gonna wanna pay attention to is your white balance. And for that, you're gonna wanna custom set your white balance. So if you have something like, you know, something like this. It's one of my favorite accessories that I carry around with me, but it's just really quick. You can set your white balance and it folds right up. I lost my little pouch for it. Or if you have any other type of gray card or a white piece of paper, but you want to make sure that you custom set your white balance so that your white balance settings are accurate. And if you're in different rooms or different lighting, you're gonna wanna set your white balance for each one of those locations. Now, another setting with the GH5 when shooting in the HLG color profile is that your ISO is gonna be set at the native ISO at 400. So for best shooting results, ISO 400 is gonna be your go-to ISO setting. And HLG is very similar to the Vlog setting that you're not gonna be able to go below 400. So you're gonna have to make some of your exposure adjustments with your aperture speed. It'd probably be a good idea to have a variable ND filter on your lens. That way you can compensate for some of that exposure, because if you're in a bright setting, today's kind of cloudy, you're not going to be able to go below ISO 400. So usually for that best dynamic range, ISO 400 is going to be your native ISO. And if at all possible, try to stay there. But I understand that you're going to get into some low light situations where you're probably going to have to bump up that ISO, but don't go too high, probably not above 1600. You're going to start introducing some noise. But one of the nice things about the HLG format is that it actually, from what I've seen, performs pretty well in low light. So as far as the actual color profile goes, when you go into the menu and select your photo style as HLG, you're gonna want to, according to the leaming LUT, set your profile a certain way. So when you go in to set your hybrid log gamma, the very first setting is actually gonna be grayed out. That's the contrast. That's gonna be grayed out. You're not gonna be able to adjust the contrast. But then for the sharpness, you're gonna wanna take that down to -5. The noise reduction down to -5. The saturation you're gonna keep at 0, and the hue you're gonna keep at 0. Now, if you are using the leaming LUT, it is very specific to that LUT. So you don't want to adjust any of these settings. You want to go with what the leaming LUT is telling you, because how that LUT is built depends on some of these settings. So you got your HLG color profile setting situated, and now let's go into one of the most important exposure tools for shooting HLG, and that's the zebra stripes. And I found that using the zebra stripes really is one of the best ways to expose your image properly when using this color profile. I found that I use that more than the actual histogram or, you know, the little meter down at the bottom of the display. So you're gonna wanna set your Zebra 1 at 90% for exposure to the right. Then for skin tones, if you're like in an interview situation or something like that, set your Zebra 2 to 75%, which is kind of based on that 40 to 45 IRE. But if you're in doubt, use the waveform, use a gray card, use the waveform, and really dial in your exposure that way. But for the overall image and an exposed to the right image, 90% on the zebra stripes really gives you the ideal exposure when you go to color with the leaming LUT. As far as the record format goes, I'd recommend using either MP4 LPCM version or the MOV. I have been using the MOV record format.
But one of the things that we know is that the HLG color profile is more for broadcasting HDR content, and so you need to get it to a Rec 709, and for that I use the LUMIX LUT. Now this video is not sponsored by the LUMIX LUT or has nothing to do in any affiliation with the LUMIX LUT, but I have found that it's been really fantastic to use with the HLG footage from the GH5. So this is just a really simple process that I've put together using LUTs that I've created to get the color grade over top of the LUMIX LUT, and I'm actually editing in probably one of the worst programs for HLG footage, and that's Adobe Premiere Pro. I know that so many of you have told me to color grade in Resolve. I just have no idea about Resolve. It's probably something that I should learn, but I do appreciate you reaching out and telling me where I should be color grading. So when it comes down to it, I think you're right. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or have been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. All right, so we're just gonna go into Adobe Premiere Pro, and I just have some clips that I shot for some of the previous videos. You know, it's springtime, trees are blooming, things are looking nice, and so I just picked some of those clips to use just to, you know, quickly go through this little color grade thing that I'm doing here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this clip and we're just going to find like just a little section and we're going to create an in and out point. And I'm just going to grab the clip and create a new sequence down here. And you know what? I'm just going to name it. That way I can keep track of it. HLG grade. So I have the clips in here and you can tell that the color is just off. This is HDR footage that we need to get to a Rec 709. So what we're going to do is actually I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. And this adjustment layer is going to be for the LUMIX LUT that is going to turn this footage into Rec 709. So I actually have the LUMIX LUT in here, and I'm going to use the LUMIX LUT Pro 3 G Series HLG for Rec 709. And so what that's going to do, as soon as I put that on there, it's going to put it into a Rec 709 color space. Now, one of the things with, you know, Lumix cameras that a lot of us struggle with is just the magenta looking colors that come out, especially like on skin tones and things like that. And you can see like there's a lot of like reds and pinks in here to start with. So I think it's going to be skewed that way a little bit. But one thing I have noticed and continued to notice is just that, you know, magenta look on some of the images. And I've noticed it with the HLG footage as well. But you know what, we can work around that and we can, you know, really color balance things that we need to. So that was just a simple process of getting our HLG file straight out of camera. And now I'm shooting all that in 10-bit, you know, 4K 10-bit. This is actually a Cinema 4K clip in 10-bit 422 color, which, you know, with the HLG and Vlog footage, you're going to want to be in those settings there to get the best color and image possible. But with this LUMIX LUT, and like I said, I'm not affiliated with the LUMIX LUT. I've just been really happy using it, and I would highly recommend you using it as well. So now we are in a Rec 709 color space, and actually what I'm going to do is create another adjustment layer, which I probably could have just used the same one. I don't know why I you know, change that, but we're going to call this one grade, and I'm just going to put it on top. And, you know, I like making things look nice here in the timeline. And so we have the grade on top of the LUMIX LUT. And so what I'm going to do is actually go here to creative, and I'm going to go and I'm going to use one of my LUTs in here that I have. And, you know, you can actually download these LUTs for free. It's a package that I have. The link's down in the description. All you need to do is put your email address in and you can have these LUTs for free. Deep Shadows, Gold, Purple Sky, or YouTube Punch. And YouTube Punch is, you know, the LUT that I use for pretty much all my YouTube videos. So I'm actually going to take this and I'm just going to apply it to this clip, and then you can tell it kind of gave it a little bit more of a orange and teal look. And then if you want to, you can go in here and really adjust some of these colors. But I mean, when it comes down to it, this is actually a pretty good image, and I'd be happy with this. So maybe one of the things I might do is actually go back to this Leaming LUT, and I might just kind of adjust some of the levels a little bit to kind of really fully expand this up here. And so I can maybe do that a couple different ways, maybe just by kind of messing with the exposure. I can just bring the overall image up a little bit. And then I can also go into the whites and blacks, and I can bring those blacks down. I don't necessarily like touching 0 with the blacks. I like kind of hovering just above 0 or around 10. And then, you know, with the whites, we can just lift those just a little bit. Now, if you have a good balanced image right out of camera, you shouldn't have to mess with these levels a whole lot. So that's really what you want to do. And if you've watched some of my previous HLG videos, you'll see that I've just been exposing according to the zebra stripes, setting the zebra stripes at 95 and exposing my image for that. So you can go in here and adjust some of these things. Like if you want to bring those shadows up just a little bit, you can do that if you feel like they're a little too dark, or bring some of those highlights down. Like in some of these areas, they might just be peaking just a little bit. So you can bring some of those highlights down and really balance out your image. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this grade right here. And there's not a whole lot to it. Like, don't overdo it. You know, to get a cinematic look, you don't need to like go crazy with it. Okay, so let's start back from the beginning. Here's what the HLG footage looks like straight out of the camera. Then we applied the Leaming LUT, and then we applied the grade, and that's kind of brought out some, you know, deeper colors and things like that. And now let's do this image right here of this flower, and this one is a little bit cloudier of a day. And so it's just a little bit, it might be just a little bit different, and we can use maybe a different grade on here. So actually I'm gonna bring this over. Since I made some adjustments on this Leaming LUT right here, I'm actually gonna bring a new one over, and as always, I like cleaning this up. Not a big deal, but I just like doing it. And so I can input that LUT HLG for Rec 709, and that's the Leaming LUT. And then you can see the difference it made already. And this image is a little bit darker as well. It's kind of bright right over here, but we might be able to just bring that up just a little bit. And we don't want it to totally peek out. Maybe this part of the image right here, we can have kind of right on the edge of 100, because we know that part's going to be blown out anyway. And then we can just bring these blacks down just a little bit, and you can kind of see that it, you know, starts making the image a little bit deeper in some of these darker spots. Okay, so we have this grade that we're going to put on here. Clean that up. And actually on this one, I'm going to use, I think Cinematic Fade. And Cinematic Fade is actually a package that I have for sale on my website. That link is down in the description as well. And you can use the discount that's in there. So if you're interested in any of these, like Cinematic Fade, Classic Summer, these simple grades right here, any of those are available on my website using the link down in the description. And you can use that discount code as well to get a discount on those if you're interested. I mean, seriously, don't worry about it. If you're interested in those, you probably have like hundreds of LUTs and you probably don't need any more, but that's totally fine. I'm going to use Cinematic Fade on this one. And this really brings out, it kind of like darkens these greens here in the image a little bit. And that actually took this, you can actually see it clipping right here. So it's way up there. So I'm actually going to go back to this Leeming LUT adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring the exposure back down just a little bit and bring those whites down just a little bit. And you know, like I said earlier, that part of the image might be clipping anyway, so we're just gonna have to live with it, because I was kind of exposing for this flower right here. So that part of the image, you know, is just, it just might be clipped, and we might just have to deal with it as long as this right here is exposed correctly. And from what I can tell, everything is looking good. And I actually like that look with it there, with that cinematic fade LUT that I have. I think that looks pretty good. So that's just a quick color grade and kind of how I've been going about this process. With the HLG footage from the GH5 and using the Leeming LUT, which I've been so happy with. And what I found using the HLG footage is that the dynamic range has been very, let's just say I've been very happy with it. And again, like I said, I'm kind of new to this whole HLG thing. So if you see any process in here that you would change in my workflow, I edit and color grade for speed to try to get it out quickly. So that's why I try to nail as much as possible. I try to nail the settings right in camera so that when I do get it to the editor, it is a very simple process to try to get it pumped out.
All right, let me start with this. Do you have to have a diffusion filter with your GH5 to make great videos? Obviously not. And this video is not to convince you to purchase diffusion filters. It's more a video about why I personally use diffusion filters to get what I would consider a more cinematic look with the Panasonic GH5. If you're new here, my name is Caleb, and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012, but this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while, whether you use the GH5 or any other camera. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. So a diffusion filter is going to soften your overall image. We know that the GH5 shoots sharp, especially with Olympus lenses, and even with the Sigma 18-35, which I have on the camera right now, and I pretty much keep on the camera about 85% of the time. But a diffusion filter is gonna take that digital edge off the image. In fact, let's toss one on right now. You know, that one might be a little too strong. Let's go with this. So a lot of times it's going to be a look that is very similar to, let's say, if you use a vintage lens on the GH5. So a diffusion filter is going to make your highlights less harsh by providing a highlight roll-off. So a lot of times with a digital image like on the GH5, you're going to see banding in the image, especially like, you know, during sunsets or if you have some extreme lights in the shot. So what the diffusion filter is going to do is create less banding and more of a glow. It'll also make skin look softer and less blemished. And we know shooting in 4K can show a lot of those imperfections, but you're beautiful just the way you are. And talking about glow, it's really evident when you're shooting in low light situations where you have like street lights or neon signs or headlights coming at you, and it's gonna create a glow or a halation around those lights. However, sometimes it can be kind of hard to control, so you wanna make sure you're using it within the context of how you wanna stylize your video.
So when it comes down to it, I'm really using diffusion filters pretty much all the time on my GH5 and Sigma 18-35. And I have a couple different ones that I use. The first being the Tiffin Black Pro Mist at an 1/8 weight. And the other one, which I just got, is the Moment Cine-Bloom at 20%. Now I use these filters for different purposes and different reasons, but I pretty much have one on the Sigma 18-35 at all times. And one of the things I really like about the Tiffin Black Pro Mist at an 1/8 weight is that it is perfect. I think it's perfect for interviews, talking heads, that type of thing. And one of the things I really like about the Tiffin Black Pro Mist is that it's designed to kind of keep the blacks black and keep the contrast in the image. So a lot of times with diffusion filters, it's gonna lift those blacks and the contrast isn't gonna be there. And I've noticed that from the Cine-Bloom that the image just isn't as contrasty, which is totally fine, but used for different situations. So for client work, for YouTube work, whatever, I pretty much always have the Tiffin Black Pro Mist at an 1/8. So I'm just gonna toss up on the screen when I had my temporary studio in my basement, which I'm still working on my basement. It's almost done, but I'm still working on it. I'll show you what it looks like with the colorful LEDs. And you can see how there's no banding in the image, and it really is a soft image. So the Black Pro Mist also comes in different weights. There's a half, there's a quarter. Recently I put together a video where I actually put together a video with the GH5 from start to finish. And I had my buddy Nate shoot some scenes of me talking. And on his lens, he was using the Black Pro Mist at a quarter. But I'll just toss up some of those clips so that you can see what that quarter looks like on the Black Pro Mist. And like I said, the other filter I have is the Cine-Bloom 20% by Moment, and I really like this diffusion filter. However, it's not gonna have the contrasty look like the Black Pro Mist, but you can get some really cool looking shots with this thing. So I'll just toss up some clips that I took using the Cine-Bloom 20% by Moment so that you can kind of gauge what that looks like with the GH5. Now, like I said, sometimes the diffusion can actually be kind of hard to control, especially in bright sunlight. Instead of getting rays into the image, you're gonna get this overwhelming glow, especially with the 20%. You know, some of those clips, it might not be right to have the glow. Maybe you want the rays coming in, but it's just going back to how you wanna stylize your video. All right, so I'm just gonna toss up some images where I used a vintage lens, the Minolta 50mm, compared to using the Cine-Bloom. So you can kind of see they're kind of have a similar feel. So check these out and let me know what you think down in the comments. So ultimately, who should be using these diffusion filters? And what I think is that if you're shooting talking heads, shooting interviews, I really think you should be using a Black Pro Mist at an 1/8 because of how soft it makes skin look. how it's gonna tone down harsh lighting conditions. Now, a lot of times some of these heavier diffusions are used for like dream sequences or kind of surreal sequences. But there's a lot of situations where you can use these diffusion filters to really stylize your video and get that nice glow, that vintage look, and something that I think looks cinematic from the GH5. Now, this is not a review video of the Sigma 18-35. There's probably, what, like thousands of videos on YouTube about the Sigma 18-35. This is not a review video. This is just a video of why in 2022 I still have the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 rigged up on my GH5 and basically keep it on there all the time when I have my whole cinema rig set up. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I do freelance video with the Panasonic GH5. If this is the first time you've seen one of my videos, or you've been watching for a while and have not hit that subscribe button, make sure you do that now. This is a pretty old lens. It's been around for a long time, so has the GH5, but I still love this combo when shooting video. Now, the first reason I still have this Sigma 18-35 rigged up to my GH5 in 2022 is just the lens specs, the overall lens specs. First of all, you have a really fast aperture at 1.8. I combine it with the Metabone Speed Booster, the 0.71 version, and that'll give you a max aperture of 1.3. And that's just as fast, if not faster, than some of the Micro Four Third mount lenses that you can get for the GH5. So if you want to get some shallow depth of field, that 1.3, you know, if you're using like an ND filter, a variable ND filter, you're going to get some really good shots at that 1.3 wide open. And then if I'm using this lens outdoors, which I use this lens outdoors quite a bit, I usually keep it around that f4 to f6 range, whatever aperture settings are in there. I usually keep it around that range and use the variable ND to kind of compensate for that exposure. Another thing I like about that aperture at 1.3 is for interviews. I think it's a perfect interview lens, especially at 1.3, because that 1.3 is going to give you enough depth of field, give you enough separation between the background and the person that you're interviewing. You don't want the background to get, you know, too muddy, so that 1.3 is actually a really good aperture speed for interviews. So not only the aperture speed, but I think the focal length of the Sigma 18-35 is a really great focal length for interviews and for B-roll type shots. Now, we know the Micro Four Thirds sensor is pretty small, and you know, it's basically, if you have a 12-35 lens that mounts directly onto the Micro Four Thirds, it's actually going to be a 24-70. But with the Sigma 18-35 with the Metabone Speed Booster at 0.71, it's actually going to give you a little bit wider of an APS-C look. Now, the Sigma 18-35 is actually an APS-C crop sensor lens, so technically the focal length would be kind of what, like a 28 to 56. But with the Metabone Speed Booster on the GH5, you're actually getting more of like a 26 to 50 look. Now, you're not going to get great distance with it. It's not like a telephoto lens or anything like that. But if you are just doing some interviews and, you know, the normal B-roll type things that you would be doing, this lens is a great focal length for that type of work. So another reason I still keep the Sigma 18-35 on my GH5 cinema rig is just the build quality of the lens. Now, this lens is actually pretty heavy, and you know what? I actually kind of like a heavier lens on my cinema rig because it's a little easier to handle when handheld. Sometimes if you have too light of a setup, you're going to get some of those micro jitters in your handheld footage, and I do a lot of handheld footage, and especially with this setup right here, I'm not going to put this on a gimbal or anything like that. So a lot of handheld footage, if your setup is a little too light, you might start seeing some of those micro jitters. But with a heavier setup like the GH5 and Sigma 18-35, you're able to kind of control the camera a little bit more. I will say though, it will hurt your back after a while. So if you are somebody that shoots weddings, it might be a pretty hefty setup. If you're shooting all day, you might just want to start lifting weights. Another thing I like about the build quality of this lens is that all of the components, focal length, zoom components, are all internal. So when you go to change your focal length, it's not going to shoot out the end of the lens. And this is important because on a cinema rig build like this, you're not going to want a zoom lens that, you know, pops out the end, because you're not going to be able to have like any type of matte box on there, or even sometimes with the follow focus, that might cause some issues as well. So having all of the components internal when you go to zoom, you'll be able to toss a matte box on there. You know, without using those cinema lenses, you'll be able to toss a matte box on here, and it's not going to affect when you go to zoom. It's not going to pop out the end. Now, this is not a weather sealed lens either, but having all of those components inside the lens is going to protect it as well. You're not going to get dust and water in that zoom part of the lens. So in that case, it kind of protects the lens a little bit, having all of those components internal. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be building out your own GH5 cinema rig, is that this lens, you'll be able to rig it up, leave it on there, toss a matte box on, and you're not going to have any issues with the zoom, with the focus rings. So you'll be able to have it rigged up all the time. The third reason I still have this lens rigged up to my GH5 is just the picture quality. Now, if you want your image super sharp, this lens will provide that. Personally, I don't necessarily like my image super sharp. I shoot with diffusion filters, and I even have the sharpness down in my color settings. But this is a very sharp lens, and you will notice that, especially with the picture quality of the GH5. I feel like I get really good colors from this lens as well, and honestly, I don't think I've had any issue with any of the picture quality or image from this lens. Thinking back on it, I don't think I've ever had an image that I haven't liked. Then if you combine those with some of the great shoot settings that the GH5 has, like Cinema 4K, the DCI version, even the high definition variable frame rate options up to 120, you're going to get a great quality image with the Sigma 18-35 paired with the GH5. Now, there's a few things that you might want to know if you have not used the Sigma 18-35, but maybe you're kind of on the fence of getting one even in 2022 for your GH5. There's a few things that you might want to know. And the first thing is that you're going to have to adapt the Sigma 18-35 to the GH5. Now, I talked a little bit about the Metabone Speed Booster. That's the one I like using. I know Viltrox has some options. I have not used Viltrox. I can't speak to it. I don't know. I had some friends that use Viltrox. They seem to like it. But personally, I have not used any Viltrox adapters or speed boosters. I've used the Metabone Speed Booster 0.71, and that has been fantastic on this camera and lens. And like I said, this is a crop sensor lens, so you're going to want to go with the 0.71 version. The 0.64 version of the Metabone Speed Booster is actually a full frame version, so you're going to want to go with the 7.1, which is going to cut down on vignetting with the Sigma 18-35. So you're going to need to adapt this lens some way, somehow, to the GH5. Now, my Sigma 18-35 is the Canon EF mount. You can get some other options, but it's pretty common to have the Canon EF mount for the Sigma 18-35. Another thing you might want if you choose to use the Sigma 18-35 is a cage and a handle. Like I said earlier in the video, this can be a pretty heavy setup. So you might want to cage it so that you can have a top handle or a side handle just for a little bit more balance. And then when you're not shooting, you can hold it like this. You don't have to hold it with two hands. It just might be a good idea to get a top handle or a side handle and a cage if you want to use the Sigma 18-35 with the GH5. Another thing to know is that there is no stabilization in this lens. Thankfully, the IBIS on the GH5 is great. And actually, if you're doing some handheld work, it actually kind of gives a pretty natural look to some of that handheld footage. So it's not a deal breaker not having that dual IBIS on this setup right here. You still get a really great image even if you're handheld. Finally, the last thing is that you might want to get the dock for the Sigma 18-35 that you can just hook right up to your computer, and you can do some of the updates for the Sigma 18-35 as well as some calibration things. It might be good to invest in that dock because it kind of future-proofs that lens a little bit, and usually it's good to run updates on things.
A ton of history with the LUMIX GH5, and there's so many reasons why I like this for client work, and I liked it for making YouTube videos, and it all stems from just the video settings, and this is fully from a video perspective. The video settings are just outstanding, but you know what? Because of the Venus engine in the LUMIX GH6, those shoot settings are even better. So basically everything stems from that new Venus engine that is in the LUMIX GH6. With the GH5, you're not gonna have any more firmware updates. It's done, it's as far as it's gonna go. With the GH6 and the new Venus engine, any new updates that come out, you're able to update the firmware. And that's one thing that LUMIX is really good about, is giving those firmware updates. And with the GH6, there's gonna be a lot of good firmware updates here coming up in the future. And the GH6 is primarily a 10-bit camera, fully 10-bit camera. You really have to dig deep into maybe some MP4 shoot settings to find 8-bit, but the GH6 is going to be a full 10-bit camera. And being a video shooter and having that color depth with 10-bit, even 420 10-bit, the color is so much better. A lot of times with 8-bit shooting, you're gonna get some color banding, especially in the skies, and even some glitches in skin tones. But with 10-bit shooting, the colors are gonna be smooth, and you're gonna have a lot of depth to those colors. And with this new engine in the GH6, you're gonna have internal 5.7K up to 30p Apple ProRes recording. And honestly, in any hybrid body like this, that is super impressive to be able to record 5.7K Apple ProRes internally. And honestly, the shoot settings keep getting better because you have 10-bit DCI 4K 120 as a shoot setting. On the GH5, you have variable frame rate up to 120 in HD, but having 120 on the GH6 as an actual shoot setting, you get that audio with it, which on the variable frame rate, you're not gonna get. But to go along with that, you also have the full HD 300 frames per second internal recording. And honestly, the GH6 is a B-roll monster. At the time of recording this, over the past 9 months, this has been my primary B-roll camera. And then one of the shoot settings that we can't forget to talk about on the GH6 is the 5.8K open gate full sensor recording. That's going to give you some great anamorphic options, but also allows you to record in the 4:3 aspect ratio and use the full width and height of the sensor. So instead of shooting vertically like this, you can actually set your frame markers and use that full height of the sensor. If you want to crop into a vertical crop or a square crop, you have the full height and width of the sensor. So as much as I love the shoot settings and record settings of the GH5, the GH6 record settings far outperform the GH5. So that might be one reason why it's time to move on from the GH5 to the GH6. Another reason it might be time to move over to the GH6 is because on the GH6, you have the full Vlog color profile. On the GH5, you have the Vlog L, which is a light version of Vlog. And let me be totally honest with you, I very rarely ever used it. I know a lot of people had a lot of success with the Vlog L on the GH5, but honestly, I had a ton of trouble with it. I had color glitches and I just never used it. I primarily used the natural color profile with the GH5. But with the GH6, you have the full S-curve of Vlog, and actually I've been shooting primarily full Vlog on the GH6 and very rarely touch the natural color profile. The full Vlog on the GH6 is going to give you 12 stops of dynamic range. But with the dynamic range boost mode, you're going to have a full 13 stops of dynamic range between your highs and lows, but that does give you a base ISO of 2000, and you might start introducing some noise to your image if you're shooting with that dynamic range boost mode on. But I love having that 12 stops of dynamic range with the full Vlog color profile on the GH6, and I really feel like it's made my image a lot better. Another reason why it might be time to move on from the GH5 is because the GH6, you have external SSD recording. So you're not gonna have to rely on SD cards or CF Express cards. You will be able to, through USB-C, record straight to SSD. In those huge Apple ProRes files, you're gonna have plenty of storage space, up to 2 terabytes of storage space on those external SSDs, which is gonna allow you to record a lot longer, a lot more. And if you're shooting like weddings or events, that external SSD recording is going to come in huge. Now on the GH5 and the GH6, you're able to record externally through HDMI, but if you want a smaller profile setup, and let's say you don't have like the Adamas Ninja, the SSD recording is a very affordable way to record externally with the GH6. A ton of storage space and super affordable. Now let's talk about IBIS. One of the reasons I've loved the GH5 is because of the in-body image stabilization, especially with any lens that provides dual IBIS on the GH5. You have 5 stops of in-body image stabilization. Okay, let me put this aside. With the GH6 and dual IBIS, you have up to 7.5 stops of in-body image stabilization. If you have any lens with the optical image stabilization combined with the GH6, that's basically a gimbal killer. You'll be able to shoot really anything, even walking shots, with the LUMIX GH6 handheld. The in-body image stabilization is outstanding and noticeably improved over the GH5. Now, another thing we need to talk about with the GH6 is the improved autofocus. Is it where it needs to be, especially for content creators? Not even close. But it is usable over the GH5, which with the GH5, the autofocus isn't even usable. There is no situation, no circumstance, no scenario where I have ever used the autofocus with the GH5. Now with the GH6 and like Human Detect, you are able to get some fairly decent tracking shots, and I've shot a little bit with a gimbal, and the autofocus has been okay. Like I said, it's not fantastic, but it is much improved over the GH5. Now, if you're watching this video, you are probably in some type of video production, whether you're making content like this or whether you're doing client work, whatever the case may be, you may be shooting a lot of interview style video. And one of the most important things with that is audio. And with the GH6, you're gonna have 4 channels of audio that you can work with. So that's gonna allow you to shoot more dynamic interviews and use multiple mics and just give you more options when it comes to audio in interviews.
Huh? Now, if you know me and you know my channel, I've been a fan of the GH5 for a long time. Still am. I still think it's a great camera, even in 2023 at the time of filming this. But there's some features on the S5 IIX that remind me a lot of the GH5, and I definitely think these features are worth noting because it's some of the things that made the GH5 so great. Now, if you're new to the channel, my name is Caleb, and I've got a ton of content about the GH5, GH6, S5 II, S5 IIX. So if you want to learn more about these cameras, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you don't miss when new videos come out. You know, I should actually toss on a monitor so I can screen record. 4K live crop. First feature on the S5 IIX that reminds me so much of the GH5 is the 4K live crop. And this is absolutely perfect for any type of B-roll you might need to shoot for a product. So go into the menu and pop up the very first menu setting, go all the way down to this little camera with the 3 dots, and the very bottom one's going to be live cropping. And you're going to have 2 different options, a 40-second version and a 20-second version. And that just means that you're gonna have a 20-second, cropped video or a 40-second cropped video. So the 40-second is obviously gonna be a little bit slower. So I'm gonna go with the 20-second, and I'm gonna set my endpoint kind of right on this camera right here so that it is kind of focused in on that camera. So I'm gonna set that, and then my endpoint, I'm gonna make this whole screen. So it kind of does like a crop out, almost like a zoom out. So I have my point set, and then what I'm gonna do is just hit record, and it's going to do this crop on its own, and I don't have to do anything. So there you have a 20-second clip of some B-roll, and it's great for any type of products. It's almost like a slider shot, not quite a slider shot, but it definitely has a nice, smooth feel to it. You're not getting any bounce when you're doing the zoom, and it definitely looks really good. Focus transition. The next feature on the S5 IIX that reminds me a lot of the GH5 is the focus transition. And what this allows you to do is put multiple focus points in the image, and you can focus rather than, pulling focus on the lens, you pull focus by a little tap on the screen. And you can have up to 3 focus points on your shot, and it just makes it a nice, smooth focus transition. All right, to get to the focus transition, we're gonna go back into the menu, and it's in the same area as live cropping, except we're gonna hit focus transition. So from here, we're gonna be able to set our different positions. So position 1, I'm going to set right here on this GH5 logo that's kind of right on the corner of the image here. So position 1, and I'm gonna set that. Then for position 2, I'm gonna go back to that camera way in the back there. You can kind of see it. That's gonna be my position 2. So I'm gonna set that. And then for my position 3, I think I'm gonna go right over to the grass that's kind of on this side over here. Position 3, I'm gonna set that. And then what I can do is I have these different focus points here, 1, 2, and 3. So let's go to position 1. So right now it's on position 3 on the grass. Let's go to position 1, and it's going to go to that GH5 logo. Then position 2, we're going to take it all the way back to that camera in the back. And then position 3, I can go back to the grass. So having those different focus positions is going to allow you to pull focus really easily if you have a scene that you need to go from one character to the other. Maybe you have a character in the foreground and a character in the background. It's going to allow you to focus pull really easily without having to put your hand on the lens or use a follow focus on the side of your rig. It's such a great carryover feature from the GH5, and honestly, I don't really use it enough. Waveform. The next great feature of the S5 IIX that reminds me of the GH5 is the waveform. And you hear me talk about the waveform all the time, but go into the menu, go to the wrench, and go down to monitor, display video, second page of that, waveform vector scope, and turn on the waveform. And the waveform is going to help you measure and gauge the exposure of your image. So you could take a gray card, for example, and put it in your shot and measure where that gray card is. Usually at 42 IRE is where you want that. You can make this bigger if you want to, make it smaller, and you can move it around the screen, put it in different spots. But this is one tool that you are definitely going to want to use to make sure that you are exposed correctly when you go to shoot on your S5 IIX. So a lot of the great features that the S5 IIX has, come from the GH5. And really, that's what made the GH5 so great and why so many people absolutely loved it. So let me know down in the comments what you think. Is there anything else about the GH5 that you've seen on the S5 IIX or anything else that the GH5 has that you'd like to see in a future Lumix camera? Let's get a conversation started down there. So the S5 IIX definitely has a lot of improvements over the GH5. And if you're looking to upgrade from the GH5, make sure you check out this video that's popping up on your screen right here, because that kind of goes through some different things if you want to consider maybe the GH6 or the S5 IIX from the GH5.